you stand in the small mud brick room where the vertical loom leans against the wall, its walnut frame worn smooth by generations of hands. Morning light seeps through a single high window, touching the rows of warp threads that hang like a silent curtain. A slight chill lingers in the air, carrying the dry scent of clay and raw wool. On the floor, a clay bowl of water rests next to a bundle of undyed yarn. Outside, a rooster calls once, and then the village stays quiet. You settle onto the low wooden stool, run a palm over the warp to test its tension, and select the first strand of deep indigo wool from the basket beside your knee. The loom waits, patient as a sleeping animal, and you begin the first row of knots. The motion lives in your hands before it reaches your thoughts. You lift a tuft of indigo wool from the basket, draw it between your thumb and forefinger to feel its springiness, and loop it around a pair of warp threads near the left edge. Your right hand reaches for the curved knife that hangs from your belt, the one with the handle darkened by long use, and you cut the wool close to the knot. The sound of the blade against the fibers is a soft snip, barely louder than your own breathing. You press the knot down with your thumb until it sits snug against the undyed weft thread below, then move to the next pair of warp strands. The indigo wool repeats in your fingers, warm and slightly oily from the lanolin that the washing did not completely remove. The loom room holds the memory of all the rugs that have grown here. The mud brick walls are the color of pale earth, and the floor is packed clay swept clean except for a few scattered wool clippings. In the corner, a clay water jug rests in a shallow dish, its surface beaded with moisture that evaporates into the dry air. Near the door, a small niche holds a wooden comb, a spare shuttle, and a ball of linen thread. The single window is unglazed, with a wooden lattice that casts a faint pattern of squares on the opposite wall. As the sun climbs, those squares of light slide down the plaster, stretching slowly into diamonds that will eventually reach the floor and fade. You have watched this happen on countless mornings, and each time it feels like a quiet companion entering the room. The warp threads run vertically from the upper beam to the lower beam, held taut by wooden pegs that you tightened the day before. They are linen, spun by your neighbor's mother in the winter months, each strand tested for strength between her teeth before it was wound onto a spool. You remember her sitting in the courtyard with the spindle whirling, the sun catching the pale thread, her hands moving with the same unhurried certainty that you bring to the loom. Now those threads form the skeleton of the rug, hidden beneath the knots, but giving the work its shape. You run the side of your hand down the warp, checking for any thread that has loosened overnight. All is even. The tension hums under your touch like a string that is tuned but not plucked. The indigo wool you are using came from a caravan last autumn, dyed in vats near Yazd, where the indigo leaves are fermented in deep stone pits. The merchant who sold it said the color would hold fast against sun and washing, and so far he has been right. In the basket, the dyed wool is a heap of dark blue that looks almost black in the shade, but when a strand catches the light, it shows depths of midnight blue and the faintest hint of violet. You pull another tuft and lay it across your thigh, smoothing it flat so that the fibers all run the same way. This small preparation makes the knotting smoother, and your hands enjoy the ritual as much as the outcome. You tie another knot, then another, moving from left to right along the row. The technique is symmetrical. The wool goes over the left warp thread, under the right, and the two ends come forward between the pair. You have done this so many times that the counting is automatic, a rhythm held in your shoulders and wrists rather than your mind. When you reach the end of the row, you set the indigo aside and pick up the weft shuttle. The shuttle is a smooth piece of tamarisk wood, hollow to hold a small spool of the same undyed linen that makes the warp. You pass it through the shed, the space between the front and back warp threads, and its passage is a soft whisper. The weft settles across the width of the rug, binding the row of knots in place. Then you take up the iron-toothed comb and beat the weft down. The comb's teeth click against the warp threads, a percussive sound that fades as quickly as it comes. You beat twice more, gently, until the row of knots sits tight and level. The room fills with the quiet sounds of your work, the snip of wool, the pass of the shuttle, the tap of the comb. Beyond the window, the village is waking slowly. You hear the scrape of a wooden door opening somewhere, the murmur of a voice greeting a neighbor, the splash of water being poured from a leather bucket into a trough. A donkey brays once. a long, patient sound that seems to stretch and then relax. These noises are as familiar as the warp threads. You notice them, but they do not interrupt the flow of your hands. The rooster crows again, farther away now, as if it has moved to the other side of the village to announce the day there too. You work without hurry. The rug grows by increments so small that you could not measure them if you tried. A hand's breadth of knots will take many hours, and you are content with that. The pattern you are forming is a simple one, a field of deep indigo that will later hold a border of madder red and ivory diamonds. But for now the indigo covers most of the warp, a dark sea spreading row by row. The design is not drawn on paper. It lives in your memory, passed down through your family like a story told so often that every word is known. Your father wove rugs, and his father before him, and each of them added small variations, a shift in the shape of a diamond or the width of a border that made the pattern their own while keeping the old bones intact. The morning light grows stronger, and the room warms slightly. The chill that greeted you at dawn has given way to a pleasant coolness, the kind that will last until midday when the sun stands directly overhead. You pause to wipe your forehead with the back of your hand, noticing the fine dust that has settled there, a blend of clay and wool fibers. The clay bowl of water near your feet is still clean. You dip your fingers into it and touch them to your lips. The water tastes of the mountains, faintly mineral and cool despite the warming air. You return your hand to the wool, and the work resumes. The vertical loom itself is a patient piece of furniture. Its walnut frame is dark with age, polished by the constant brush of hands and clothing. The upper beam is thicker than your arm, carved with a small groove that guides the warp threads as they turn. The lower beam is set into notches in the side posts, and a pair of stone weights hold it steady. Where the wood meets the floor, small depressions have been worn into the clay over decades, so the loom cannot shift even if you lean against it. Sometimes you think of the person who built this loom, a craftsman whose name no one remembers, and you feel a quiet gratitude for the sturdiness of his work. The loom will likely outlast you, as it outlasted your father, and someone else's hands will tie knots here long after yours have stilled. You move through the next row of knots with the same steady pace. The indigo wool in the basket is dwindling, and you note that you will need to card more this afternoon. The thought passes without urgency. Behind you the door stands open, and you can see the packed earth courtyard of your home, where a small plane tree casts a dappled shade on the flagstones. A clay oven sits in one corner, cold now, and beside it a stack of thornwood waits to be lit for the evening bread. Your neighbor's child walks past the doorway, carrying a bundle of mint that fills the air with a sharp, clean scent. You do not look up, but your nose tells you the child is there, and the scent lingers for a moment before fading into the general smell of wool and clay. The shuttle passes, the comb beats, the knots accumulate. The row you are working on now is the 7th of the morning, though you do not count them in numbers. Instead, you count in the feel of the woven surface under your fingertips, the way the pile grows dense and soft. Each knot is a tiny point of color, and together they create a texture like a field of close-cropped grass. When you rest your palm on the completed section, the wool pushes back with a gentle resilience. It is a satisfying sensation, one that tells you the work is even and the tension correct. You let your hand linger there for a moment before returning to the next knot. Outside, the light shifts as a cloud passes over the sun, and the room dims briefly. The squares on the wall fade and then sharpen again. A dove coos from the plane tree, its call a soft three-note phrase that repeats twice and stops. The water channel that runs along the edge of the garden gurgles, carrying snowmelt from the distant peaks to the village orchards. That sound is constant, a low murmur beneath all the others, and you have heard it so often that it has become part of the silence itself. When travelers first arrive from other regions, they often remark on the sound of the water, but for you it is simply the voice of the valley, as ever-present as your own heartbeat. Your stomach reminds you that you have not eaten since the previous evening, but the hunger is distant and easily ignored. You will break your morning fast when the sun reaches the mark on the wall that you use as a rough clock. That mark is a small chip in the plaster just above the niche. When the light touches it, you know it is time to set the work aside and walk to the shaded platform where your neighbor shares fresh flatbread and tea. Until then, your hands continue their dance. The indigo wool runs out, and you reach for another skein, untying the cotton string that binds it and loosening the strands. The new wool is slightly darker than the last batch, a difference so subtle that only you would notice. You mix it with the remaining tufts in the basket, blending the two shades so the transition will be invisible in the finished rug. The merchant had promised a consistent dye lot, but small variations are natural, and you have learned to work with them rather than against them. You tie the first knot of the new row, the blended indigo subtle in the morning light. Your cutting knife shifts in your grip as you angle it to trim the wool flush with the pile. The blade is made of iron from the nearby hills, hammered and sharpened by the village blacksmith, a quiet man who works at a forge under an old carob tree. You remember the day he shaped this knife, the ring of his hammer, the hiss of hot metal plunged into water. He made it to fit your hand, watching you grip a wooden model before he fired the forge. Now the handle bears the imprint of your palm and fingers, a small map of your working life. You wipe the blade on the edge of the basket to remove any clinging fibers and continue. The light reaches the chip in the plaster. Without hurry, you finish the knot you were tying, press it down, and set the knife on the loom beam. You rise from the stool, your knees making a soft cracking sound that you ignore, and stretch your arms overhead. The warp threads sway slightly in the breeze from the door. You leave the loom uncovered. You will return soon, and no dust will settle in so short a time. Stepping into the courtyard, you feel the sun on your face and smell the bread baking in a neighbor's oven, the yeast and the wood smoke mingling pleasantly. The world outside the loom room is bright and spacious, the mountains hazy in the distance, their peaks still streaked with snow. On the shaded platform, your neighbor has placed a round of flatbread on a wooden board and 2 clay cups of tea. You sit beside her on the worn cushions, and neither of you speaks for a while. The tea is hot and slightly bitter, sweetened with a scrap of dried date. You tear off a piece of bread and chew slowly, watching a line of ants cross the flagstone at your feet. The neighbor's daughter runs past with a hoop made from a bent reed, her laughter bright and brief. The moment is ordinary and complete. After you eat, you wash your hands in the courtyard basin, cupping water from the clay jar and letting it run over your wrists. The coolness settles you. You walk back to the loom room, where the warp threads still wait, the motes of dust drifting lazily in the shaft of light. The stool has not moved. You sit, pick up the bundle of indigo wool, and resume where you left off. The first knot of the new row feels like the continuation of a thought paused mid-sentence. The day outside continues its quiet unfolding. A trader from the eastern caravan, which has not yet arrived but is expected, sends a scout ahead on a thin-legged horse. You hear the hoofbeats, light and quick, passing along the road by the village wall. Someone calls a greeting, and the hoofbeats slow to a walk. This small event does not concern you. The caravan will come when it comes, and you will hear its bells and the grumble of camels when it does. For now the loom room is your entire world, a space measured in warp threads and wool snippets. Your hands maintain their rhythm, the symmetrical knot, the cut, the press, the pass of the shuttle, the beat of the comb. Each cycle takes perhaps 20 seconds, maybe a little more, and each cycle is nearly identical to the last. Yet woven into that sameness is an infinite variety of tiny adjustments, a warp thread that needs a slight tug to straighten, a piece of wool that is thicker and requires more pressure to seat. These micro-decisions happen below conscious thought, and they keep the work absorbing without being demanding. Your mind drifts like the dust in the sunbeam, settling on nothing for long. The wall beside the loom shows the past rugs. Faint lines have been scratched into the plaster, each representing a completed piece and the number of knots it contained. The marks are your father's doing, a simple tally that he kept out of habit rather than necessity. Some of the lines are thin, scratched with a nail. Others are broader, made with the tip of a knife. You have not added to the tally in many months, preferring to let the rugs speak for themselves once they leave the loom. The new rug will not be counted until it is cut free, washed, and laid in the sun to dry. That day is many weeks away. The morning ebbs into its final hour. The light from the high window has moved past the niche and now illuminates a corner of the floor where a small clay spindle rests on its side. The shadow of the window lattice has stretched into long parallelograms that lean toward the door. You're aware of time passing, but only in the way you are aware of your own breathing, as a background rhythm that asks for no attention. Your hands continue their steady work, the indigo pile thickening with each row. A fly buzzes in through the doorway, circles the room twice, and settles on the upper loom beam. It rubs its front legs together and then flies out again. You watch its departure without pausing your knotting. The sky visible through the door is a bleached blue, cloudless now, promising a warm afternoon. The air in the room remains cool thanks to the thick mud brick walls that hold the night's temperature long into the day. You appreciate this natural balance, the way the house protects you from the extremes of sun and wind. The basket of indigo wool has diminished noticeably. You have knotted perhaps a finger's width of new rug since dawn. Progress is measured not in hours, but in the depth of the woven pile as you slide your palm across it. You do this every dozen rows or so, an instinctive check that confirms your hands are true. The surface feels even, the knots tight, but not crowded. You find a single strand of wool that protrudes above the rest, pluck it out with a swift pinch, and smooth the spot with your thumb. The imperfection vanishes. You think for a moment of the rug's eventual owner. You do not know who will buy it, whether it will travel west to a merchant's house in Isfahan or north to a tribal chieftain's tent. Perhaps it will cross the sea to a cold country where such rugs are hung on walls rather than spread on floors. The thought is vague and quickly fades. It does not matter to the weaving. The rug is its own purpose now, a thing of wool and time that will outlast your memory of its making. The shuttle passes with its soft hum. The comb beats 3 times, once for the center and twice for the edges, a pattern you learned as a child. You remember sitting on a cushion beside the loom, watching your father's hands move just as yours move now. He did not teach you with words. He simply let you watch until you picked up a tuft of wool and tried. Your first knots were loose and uneven, but he only nodded and straightened the warp for you to try again. That patience lives in the loom room still, as integral as the mud brick walls. The rooster has fallen silent. The donkey brays no more. The village seems to be holding its breath, suspended in the late morning stillness that arrives when the sun climbs too high for comfortable labor. You know that soon the other weavers and potters and blacksmiths will retreat to shaded corners for a rest, and you will join them for a short while, but not yet. You want to finish this row, this one more row, and then perhaps one more after that. You tie the final knot of the row, press it, cut it. Your left hand reaches for the shuttle and sends it through the shed with a familiar flick of the wrist. The linen weft glides across the warp and emerges from the far side, where you catch it and draw it taut, but not too tight. The comb beats. 1, 2, 3. The row is sealed. You look at the indigo field stretching between the beams, its surface dense and uniform, and you allow yourself a small internal nod of satisfaction. But there is no pause. Your fingers are already reaching for the next tuft of wool, and the knife is already poised. The loom room at dawn has become the loom room at mid-morning, and the work continues, stitch by quiet stitch, as it has for all the mornings you can remember, and all the mornings yet to come. You leave the loom room and step into the courtyard, where the morning air is already losing its dawn chill. The carding bench sits against the eastern wall under a pole awning, woven from date palm fronds, their strips casting a dappled shade that shifts with the breeze. A basket of washed fleece waits beside the bench, the wool still carrying a faint animal smell despite the repeated rinsings in the village channel. You settle onto the wooden stool, its seat polished by years of use, and pull the first handful of fleece from the basket. The fibers are tangled and slightly matted, full of tiny curls that catch the light, and you begin the slow work of separating them before the carding brushes even touch the wool. The carding brushes are a pair of flat wooden paddles with handles worn to fit your palms, their faces studded with rows of fine wire teeth, bent at a gentle angle. You lay one brush on your thigh, teeth facing up, and spread the fleece across it, pulling the wool apart with your fingers until it forms a thin, even layer. The wires catch the strands and hold them, and you take the second brush in your other hand, positioning it above the first with the teeth pointing down. The motion that follows is not a single movement, but a slow, circular glide. You draw the upper brush across the lower one, the wire teeth combing through the fleece, untangling the fibers, and lifting them into a soft, airy web. The sound is a low rhythmic scratch, like dry grass being stirred, and it fills the courtyard with a quiet music. You work through the first handful and add another, building up a thin bat of wool on the lower carder. When the bat is smooth and uniform, with no lumps or tangled patches, you reverse the brushes and transfer the wool from one to the other, a careful tilt of the wrist that flips the bat without tearing it. This second pass refines the carding, aligning the fibers so that they all run in roughly the same direction. The wool grows in volume, becoming lighter and fluffier, and you catch the familiar scent of clean fleece, a warm, grassy smell that reminds you of the high pastures where the sheep graze in summer. Your hands move with the same unhurried rhythm they brought to the loom, and the morning sun creeps across the flagstones, warming the clay mortar between them. A basket of carded wool already holds a small mound of finished bats. You add each new one to the pile, passing it down gently so it will not blow away in the breeze. The carding is slow work, but you do not rush. Each batter must be even and consistent, because any thin spots or clumps will show in the spun yarn and, later, in the knots of the rug. Your neighbor's mother taught you to card when you were young enough to need a cushion to sit on, and her voice comes back to you now without words, just a sense of how the wool should feel under your fingers. Springy, uniform, alive. A donkey brays somewhere near the village well, a long wheezing call that sounds like it is trying to tell the whole valley a very important secret. You glance up briefly and see the animal standing beside the stone trough, its ears flicking at flies. The water carrier is filling his leather bucket, and the donkey shifts its weight, patient in the way that only donkeys are patient. You return to your carding. The sound of the brushes continues, scratch and pause, as you work through the fleece. The basket of raw wool dwindles, and the basket of carded bats rises. You pause occasionally to pick bits of vegetable matter from the fleece, a thorn, a dried stem, a tiny burr that clings to the wool like a determined traveler. These small impurities would ruin the smoothness of the final yarn, so you remove them with care, dropping them onto the ground where the ants will carry them away. The courtyard floor is scattered with these tiny discards, and you know you will sweep them up later with a palm frond broom already leaning in the corner. When the raw fleece is nearly all carded, you set the brushes aside and take up a bat of carded wool, holding it between both hands. The lighter, airy mass is ready to be formed into rovings, loose rolls of fiber that can be spun into yarn. You place the bat on the bench and begin to roll it with your palm, a gentle forward and backward motion that gathers the wool into a long, soft rope. The roving does not need to be tight or twisted. It will be drawn out during spinning, but for now it must hold together enough to be stored. You roll the first length and coil it into a dark basket already half full of similar rovings, their creamy white color, a contrast to the dark palm fibers. Each roving is about the thickness of your thumb, uneven in a pleasing, natural way, and when you press the pile, it yields with the spring of trapped air. You roll roving after roving, your hands working the wool from its carded state into these soft, airy cords. The motion is repetitive and calming, your mind drifting across the courtyard to watch the shadows shorten as the sun climbs higher. The mud brick walls of your house glow a warm ochre, and the plane tree in the corner shakes its leaves in a passing breeze, each one a small green hand waving slowly. The water channel beyond the wall continues its low, constant murmur, and the doves coo from the branches, their calls blending into a soft chorus. After the last roving is coiled, you stretch your arms overhead and feel the slight ache in your shoulders from the carding. You rise from the bench, lifting the basket of carded rovings and carrying it back inside to the loom room, where you place it next to the indigo wool. The undyed rovings will later be spun into weft thread, or perhaps dyed with walnut husks for a border, but for now they rest in their basket, ready for the spindle when the time comes. You look at the covered loom, its shape quiet in the corner, and you know you will return to it, but first there is the warp to prepare. The warp beam is a long, smooth pole of poplar wood mounted on the upper part of the loom, and it can be removed and laid across two trestles for dressing. You slip the beam from its notches, balancing its weight across your shoulder, and carry it out to the courtyard, where the trestles wait under the plane tree. A friend from the next house, Yasmin, sees you from her doorway and walks over without being called. She carries a ball of linen thread in one hand and a spare shuttle in her pocket, and her presence is as natural as the shade. You set the beam on the trestles, and the two of you stand on opposite sides, ready to begin the long process of winding the warp. The linen thread comes from the same batch your neighbor's mother spun last winter, stored in a clay jar to keep the dust away. You take the end of the thread and tie it to the beam with a secure knot, one that can be easily undone when the weaving is finished. Yasmin holds the spool, and you begin to walk backward along the length of the courtyard, unspooling the thread as you go. The thread is smooth and strong, a pale cream color that will disappear under the walnuts, and it unreels with a faint whisper, the spool turning in Yasmin's hands. The courtyard is just long enough for the length of a rug. You pace out the distance, stepping carefully over the flagstones, and stop when you reach the far wall. There you turn and walk back, holding the thread taut but not too tight, and Yasmin guides it onto the beam, keeping each pass parallel to the last. The two of you work in a rhythm that needs no talking. Your steps match her hands, and the warp beam slowly fills with a curtain of linen threads. The process is meditative, the back and forth walking like a slow dance. The only sounds the scuff of your sandals on stone and the soft turning of the spool. After each length, you pause to check the evenness of the warp. You run your thumb across the threads where they lie on the beam, feeling for any that are looser or tighter than the rest. If a thread sags, you pull it gently from the far end until the tension matches its neighbors. Yasmin watches, her head tilted, and when you nod, she resumes passing the spool. The threads accumulate, a line of cream turning into a solid mass, and the beam grows heavier. You have made warps together many times, for your rug and for hers, and the companionship is comfortable, without the need to fill the silence with chatter. After an hour, the warp is complete, and you secure the end with another knot. You and Yasmin lift the beam together, its weight now substantial, and carry it back into the loom room. Setting it into the upper notches, you then thread the lower beam through the shed, a procedure you know by heart, pulling the threads through the heddle loops that will allow you to raise and lower alternate threads. The heddle is a simple cord and stick device, and you check each loop to make sure it slides freely. Yasmin hands you the wooden shuttle loaded with linen weft, and you use it to weave a heading, a few rows of plain weave that will anchor the warp and give a firm base for the knots. Her hands hold the warp taut while you beat the weft down with the iron comb. The heading is unknotted, a blank canvas waiting for the wool. When the warp is dressed and the tension pegged tight, Yasmin brushes off her hands and smiles, a small, quiet expression that says the work is well done. She returns to her own house, and you are left alone with the loom. The warp threads stand ready, their cream lines stretching from top to bottom, a silent invitation. You run the flat of your hand over them, feeling the collective tension, a soft thrum like a distant harp string. The warp is even, the spacing perfect. You can already imagine the rows of knots that will cover it. The morning has passed, and the sun is now high and hot. You fetch a pot of strong tea from the kitchen alcove, the black tea leaves steeping in water boiled over the courtyard fire, and you carry a clay cup to the shaded platform by the plane tree. The cushion is cool under you, and you lean back against the trunk, sipping the bitter liquid slowly. The tea has a hint of cardamom, a small luxury from a past caravan, and the taste lingers on your tongue. You close your eyes and listen to the sounds of the village, the blacksmith's hammer tapping a steady rhythm in the distance, the murmur of voices from the caravanserai, the rustle of poplar leaves. A distant clatter reaches your ears, faint but distinct. It is the sound of a caravan bell, the kind that camels wear around their necks, a bronze clapper striking a hollow shell. The clatter is irregular, a soft jangle that fades and returns as the breeze shifts. You open your eyes and look toward the eastern road, but the dust haze hides any movement. The caravan is still some distance away, probably just entering the valley pass, and it will be an hour or more before it reaches the village. The bell is a promise of new goods, new faces, and perhaps new colors for the rug, but you feel no urgency. The wool is carded, the warp is dressed, and the loom waits. You can begin the knotting again whenever you choose. The tea cools in the cup. You finish it slowly, savoring the last drops, and then wash the cup in the basin by the wall. The water from the jar is still cool, and you splash a little on your face, blinking the dust from your eyelashes. The day stretches ahead, full of quiet possibility. You return to the loom room, where the warp threads gleam in the shaft of light, and you sit on the stool. The indigo wool is still there in its basket. The curved knife rests on the beam, and the weaver's comb lies close at hand. You pick up the first tuft of indigo, testing its spring, and you begin the first row of knots on the fresh warp. The warp threads, so carefully prepared, accept the knots with a soft grip, and the weaving continues without pause. The carding and the winding already becoming memories, absorbed into the growing fabric under your hands. The caravan bell grows from a distant clatter into a steady, rolling chime that seems to come from every direction at once. You are at the loom, your hands holding a half-formed knot, when the sound fills the room like slow water rising. Through the open doorway, the eastern road is still invisible behind the village wall, but the dust cloud above it tells its own story, a pale brown plume lifting into the blue sky and drifting lazily westward. You finish the knot, press it down, and pick up the next tuft of indigo wool without pausing, but a small corner of your attention shifts to the road and the travellers approaching along it. The caravan's arrival is not sudden. It announces itself in layers, each one arriving before the one that follows. First the bells, which have been jangling at the edge of hearing for the better part of an hour. Then the low rumble of many hooves and padded feet striking packed earth, a sound that you feel in the soles of your sandals before you truly hear it. The camels groan, a deep, guttural vibration that travels through the ground and up the legs of the loom, so that the warp threads tremble slightly under your fingers. Dogs begin to bark along the village wall, not in alarm, but in announcement, their voices overlapping in a ragged chorus. And finally, the voices of men calling to one another, words you cannot yet distinguish, but whose tone is easy and unhurried, the tones of travellers who have reached a known resting place. You tie another knot and glance through the doorway. The first shapes are becoming visible through the dust haze. The swaying silhouette of a led camel, tall and long-necked, its load wrapped in faded striped cloth. Behind it more camels appear, their numbers impossible to count as they merge and separate in the golden dust. Small figures on donkeys flank the line, and a few men walk on foot, their robes flapping slowly. The whole procession moves at a pace that is neither fast nor slow, a pace set by the long journey behind it and the long journey ahead. The caravan has been on the road for weeks, perhaps months, and it carries the patience of distance in every step. The caravanserai stands at the western edge of the village, a large square building of mud brick with a central courtyard open to the sky. Its walls are thick and high, pierced by a single arched gate that faces the eastern road. The gate stands open, as it always does, and the caravan begins to funnel through it, the camels ducking their heads slightly as they pass under the arch. The bells are louder now and more distinct. You can hear the individual voices of different bells, some deep and resonant, others higher and more silvery. A brass lantern swings from a pack frame, catching the sun and throwing small flashes of light across the courtyard wall. The dust settles slowly in the still air. From your stall at the loom, you can see the caravanserai gate through the gap between your neighbor's house and the village wall. The view is framed like a small painting, a rectangle of sunlit earth and moving shapes. You do not stop weaving to watch, but you let your gaze drift there between knots, the way you might look up at the sky to judge the hour. The caravan master, an older man in a dusty blue robe, is the last to enter. He rides a sturdy grey donkey and carries a long stick with a leather tassel, which he uses not to strike but to gesture, pointing toward the shaded arcade where the goods will be unloaded. His face is lined and calm, the face of someone who has crossed this valley many times and expects to cross it many more. Inside the caravanserai, the activity is orderly. The camel drivers unload the panniers, stacking them under the covered platforms that line the courtyard. Each bundle is wrapped in coarse cloth and tied with sisal rope, and the men handle them with the ease of long practice, lifting and setting without wasted motion. The camels, freed of their burdens, kneel on the packed earth and begin to chew their cud, their jaws moving in slow circles. Their groans subside into contented rumbles, and the smell of their hides, musky and warm, drifts across the village. The village well is busy as the water carrier fills trough after trough, the leather bucket creaking on its rope, and the donkeys drink with deep, sucking gulps. You turn back to the loom and tie a row of knots, your hands moving automatically. The indigo field is growing deeper, and you are perhaps a finger's width past the heading. The new warp holds the knots well, the tension you set earlier proving true. You work without hurry, but with a steady continuity that carries you through the row and into the next. The caravan noises become a background texture, woven into the sounds of the village, the snip of your knife, the pass of the shuttle, the low murmur of men's voices from the caravanserai, the occasional bray of a donkey. None of these sounds demand your attention, and you give them none beyond a quiet awareness. A knock comes at your courtyard door, soft and brief. You set down the knife and rise, crossing the woven mat to the wooden door set in the wall. When you open it, a young man stands there, the caravan master's apprentice, holding a small clay jar sealed with wax. He bows slightly and explains that his master sends greetings and a gift of dried limes from the southern orchards, hoping the weaver of the house will consider trading a finished rug for indigo when the caravan breaks its journey. His voice is polite and quiet, and his robe is the same dusty blue as his master's. You accept the jar with a nod, thank him, and close the door. The dried limes rattle inside the jar like small stones, and their sour, smoky scent escapes through the wax. You place the jar on the shelf in the loom room and return to your stool. The exchange has taken less than a minute, and already it feels like something that happened long ago. The caravan master's request settles into your thoughts as you resume knotting. You have one finished rug in storage, a piece you completed in the winter months with a pattern of cypress trees and running water, and you could trade it for indigo if the quality is good. But that decision belongs to another moment, and you set it aside. The current rug, the one growing under your fingers, is not for the caravan master. It will take many more weeks to complete, and it has already begun to tell its own story in indigo and undyed linen. You think about the indigo the caravan might carry, whether it will be from Yazd or from a different dyer, and then the thought passes, replaced by the simple texture of the wool between your fingers. The afternoon light is shifting now, losing its morning sharpness and taking on a golden quality that softens the edges of things. The shadow of the window lattice has moved from the opposite wall to the floor, where it lies like a tilted chessboard. In the courtyard, the plane tree shadows have stretched eastward, and a few yellow leaves detach and spiral down, landing on the flagstones without a sound. The air is warm but not hot, and the breeze that enters through the high window carries a faint smell of spices from the caravanserai, cumin, maybe, or coriander, the cook fires being lit for the traveller's midday meal. The smell mingles with the wool and clay of the loom room, a pleasant combination that you breathe in without comment. You pause your knotting to adjust the tension on the right side of the warp. One thread has loosened slightly, perhaps from the change in humidity that the caravan's arrival brought, and you tighten the peg with a careful turn of your wrist. The warp sings back into tune, and you test it with the back of your hand before returning to the knots. The interruption is small, absorbed into the larger flow of the work, and your rhythm re-establishes itself within a few stitches. The indigo row progresses, the knots seating themselves in the linen weft with a firmness that promises durability. Through the doorway you see a trader emerge from the caravanserai and walk toward the village well. He carries a water skin over his shoulder, and his striped robe marks him as a man from the western provinces. He stops to speak with the water carrier, their conversation a quiet exchange of nods and gestures, and then he fills his skin and walks back. A child from the next house follows him at a safe distance, curious about the stranger, and the trader pauses to hand the child a small sweet, wrapped in a leaf. The child runs away laughing, and the trader continues on. The entire interaction passes in a few heartbeats, a small kindness observed and then released. You return your full attention to the loom, and the world narrows to the span of the warp threads. The symmetrical knot, the cut, the press, the shuttle humming through the shed, the comb beating the weft down with its familiar triple tap. These actions repeat, and each repetition is its own small world, containing everything necessary within it. You think of nothing, or rather you think of the knot you are tying now and the knot you will tie next, and that is enough. The caravan outside might as well be in another country, So complete is your immersion in the wool and the linen and the dark indigo pile. But the caravan does not remain entirely outside. A little later, when the sun has moved another hand's width across the sky, a woman from the caravan walks past your doorway. She is carrying a bundle of wool yarn dyed a deep rust red, and she pauses to admire the indigo rug taking shape on the loom. You do not know her, but she greets you as a fellow craftsperson, her eyes moving across the warp with understanding. She asks if the indigo is from Yazd, and you tell her it is from a previous caravan, last autumn's, and that it has held its color well. She nods, satisfied, and mentions that her husband trades in madder root if you ever need a good red. Then she continues on her way toward the caravanserai, her red wool bright against the dun-colored walls. You file away the information about the madder root, knowing you will need red for the border when the indigo field is done, and you continue weaving. The afternoon deepens, and the caravanserai settles into a quieter rhythm. The initial bustle of unloading has given way to rest. The camels lie in the courtyard, their long legs folded under them, their eyes half closed. The traders sit in the shade of the arcades, drinking tea and talking in low voices. A few have spread out small carpets and are offering their goods for local trade. Packets of spice, copper pots, bangles of colored glass, rolls of cotton cloth from the eastern looms. The village women drift into the caravanserai in twos and threes, examining the wares with careful hands and quiet bargaining. The exchanges are gentle, almost sleepy, conducted in murmurs that carry no further than the arcade. You do not go to the caravanserai. You stay at your loom, watching the small procession of villagers and traders through the gap in the wall, but your hands never stop. The rug is growing, row by slow row. The indigo pile now covers most of the warp you can see, a dark, soft surface that seems to absorb the light. When you run your palm over it, the wool feels cool and dense, the knots so close together that you cannot separate them with your fingers. You have woven perhaps 2 finger widths since the caravan arrived, and the progress gives you a quiet satisfaction that you do not need to express. The caravan's cook fires send up thin columns of smoke that twist in the still air and vanish. The smell of cooking lentils and onions reaches you, and your stomach stirs, reminding you that you have not eaten since the morning flatbread. You finish the row you are on, beat it down, and set the knife and shovel on the beam. Rising from the stool, you stretch your back and walk to the courtyard, where the afternoon shade has grown long and cool. You fetch a piece of flatbread, some olives, and a small bowl of yogurt from the kitchen alcove, and you eat standing by the plane tree, watching the caravanserai gate. While you eat, the caravan master walks out of the gate and stands for a moment, surveying the village with the same calm gaze you saw earlier. He notices you under the tree and walks over, his steps slow and deliberate. He asks if the jar of dried limes arrived safely, and you thank him, telling him they are already on your shelf. He nods, and the two of you talk for a few minutes about the road, the weather in the eastern passes, the price of wool. His voice is measured and low, the voice of a man who uses words sparingly. He mentions that he will stay 2 nights before continuing west, and that he has indigo, madder, and some walnut-brown if you wish to trade. You tell him you will visit the caravanserai in the morning to look at his colors. He nods again, touches his hand to his chest in a gesture of farewell, and returns to the gate. The conversation is like a stone dropped into still water, its ripples fading quickly. You finish your food, wash your bowl and cup in the basin, and return to the loom. The room is dusky now, the light from the high window having softened from gold to a pale honey. The dust motes that danced in the beam earlier have settled, and the air is still. You light a small oil lamp that hangs from a hook on the wall, and its flame throws a warm circle of light onto the warp. The colors change in the lamplight. The indigo becomes almost black. The undyed linen takes on a buttery glow, and the shadows behind the loom deepen into a rich brown. You find that you can knot by this light nearly as well as by daylight. The contrast between the dark wool and the pale warp is enough to guide your hands. You weave another row by lamplight, then another. The village is growing quieter as the evening approaches. The doves have stopped cooing, and the dogs have stopped barking. The caravanserai gate still stands open, but fewer people pass through it. The camels have fallen asleep, their breathing slow and rhythmic, and the traders have retreated to their rooms along the arcade. The only sound from the caravan is the occasional jingle of a bell. As a camel shifts in its sleep, a sound so soft it might be mistaken for a star twinkling. The muezzin's evening call rises from the small mosque, and the chant rolls across the village like a slow wave, each syllable clear and unhurried. You have heard this call every evening of your life, and it does not interrupt your work so much as it marks the passing of another portion of the day. You pause for a moment as the voice fades, your hands resting on the warp, and the silence that follows is deep and complete. Then you pick up the shuttle and continue. The row is finished, and you decide that this will be the last row before you cover the loom for the night. You pass the shuttle, beat the weft down, and run your palm over the completed section one final time. All is even. All is tight. You take the length of undyed cotton that hangs from a peg on the wall and drape it over the warp, tucking the edges around the side beams so that no dust will settle on the weaving while you sleep. The loom becomes a ghostly shape. Its walnut frame and pale cover a quiet presence in the corner. You extinguish the lamp, and the room fills with darkness and the cool smell of wool. Walking out to the courtyard, you see the stars emerging, one by one, in the deepening blue above the valley. The plane tree is a silhouette against the sky, and the water channel continues its patient murmur somewhere in the dark. A few cooking fires still glow in the caravanserai, orange points of light visible through the gate. You stand for a while, letting the night air settle on your skin, and you think about the indigo and the madder and the walnut-brown waiting in the caravan's packs. But the thought is gentle, without urgency, and you let it drift away into the darkness like the smoke from the fires. The caravan has arrived, and the village has absorbed it into its quiet rhythm, and tomorrow the colors will still be there. For now, there is only the night, and the soft sound of your own breathing, and the loom waiting under its cotton cover, and the long stillness of the valley folding around you like a blanket. This chapter is given entirely to the movement of your hands. The lamp has been lit, the warp threads stand ready, and the indigo wool waits in its basket. You sit on the low wooden stool and pick up the first tuft, drawing it between your thumb and forefinger until the fibers lie flat and aligned. The room is quiet except for the scratch of wool being separated from the skein, a sound like a small animal stirring in dry grass, and then the knife is in your other hand, the handle warm from your palm, the blade curved to follow the motion of cutting. You loop the indigo tuft around a pair of warp threads near the left edge, bringing the ends forward through the space between them, and the symmetrical knot forms with a soft, decisive pull. The knife blade nips the wool close to the knot, and the snipped ends fall onto the growing pile of clippings at your feet. You press the knot down with your thumb, seating it against the row below, and move to the next pair of warp strands. The knot repeats. You select a tuft, loop left over right, pull the ends forward, pull again until the knot snugs against the warp, cut, press, move on. Each cycle occupies the space of a single breath, and your breathing slows to match the rhythm of your hands. You do not count the knots, nor the rows, nor the time that passes. The counting is held in your muscles, in the memory of your fingers, which know when a row is complete by the way the shuttle picks up the weft thread and sends it humming through the shed. The shed is the gap between the front and back warp threads, opened by the heddle bar that you lift with a slight pressure of your foot on the treadle, a smooth, silent mechanism of cord and wood that parts the warp like a curtain parting. Through this gap, the shuttle glides, trailing the linen weft behind it, and the thread unspools from the hollow inside the shuttle with a gentle, steady whisper. The shuttle you are using now is made of tamarisk wood, its surface polished by so many passages through the warp that it gleams a soft honey color in the lamplight. It fits your hand the way the knife does, its edges rounded to slide without catching, its weight balanced so that it travels straight from one side of the warp to the other. You catch it as it emerges on the far side, draw the weft thread through until a small loop remains, and then you change the shed, lowering the front warp and raising the back with a second press of the treadle. The shuttle returns through this new opening, and the weft thread crosses the warp once more, binding the row of knots in place. The double pass of the shuttle bookends each row, a quiet parenthesis that holds the colored wool secure. Now the cone comes into play. It hangs from a hook on the side beam, a heavy tool with iron teeth set into a grip of tamarisk wood worn smooth and dark by years of gripping. You lift it from its hook, feeling its weight settle into your palm, and you bring the teeth down against the newly laid weft thread. The first beat is gentle, a tap that seats the weft against the row of knots without compressing them too much. The second beat is firmer, packing the row down so that the pile stands dense and upright. The third beat is lighter again, a finishing tap that evens out any irregularities. The sound of the comb against the weft is a percussive clack, followed by two softer echoes, and then silence as you return the comb to its hook. This three-beat rhythm is as old as the loom itself, taught to you by watching your father's hands, and it has become so natural that you would find it difficult to beat the weft in any other pattern. You select another tuft of indigo wool and begin the next knot. Loop left over right, pull, cut, press. The cycle continues, and the rug grows by increments too small for the eye to measure. If you were to look closely at the pile where it rises from the undyed heading, you might see a gradual increase in height, a thickening of the indigo mass that spreads across the warp like a slow tide. But you do not look closely. You feel the progress with your fingertips, running your palm over the woven section every dozen rows or so, checking for evenness, for any knot that sits higher or lower than its neighbors. The surface feels dense and springy, the wool fibers forming a unified texture that pushes back against your hand with a gentle bristling resistance. You find a knot that is slightly looser than the others, its ends not fully seated, and you press it down with extra care, smoothing the area around it until the imperfection disappears. The warp threads are your constant companions in this work. You know each one by its position, its tension, its slight variations in thickness despite the spinner's care. The linen threads are a pale cream color, almost white in the lamplight, and they divide the indigo pile into vertical columns that run from the top beam to the bottom. As you tie each knot around a pair of warp threads, you are careful to apply the same pressure each time, pulling the wool to the same degree of tightness, so that the knots sit uniformly across the entire width of the rug. Too much tension, and the warp will bow inward, distorting the pattern. Too little, and the knots will be loose, prone to pulling free with wear. The balance is something you feel rather than measure, a sense of rightness that lives in your fingers. The dust motes drift in the shaft of light from the high window, some of them settling on the back of your hand, others continuing their slow, aimless journey into the shadowed corners of the room. You notice them without really seeing them, the way you notice your own breathing as a soft background to the work. The lamplight flickers occasionally when a draft moves through the room, and the flame bends and straightens, sending a ripple of changing light across the warp. The wool responds to this flicker by seeming to shift color, its deep indigo becoming for a moment a shade closer to violet, then returning to its midnight blue. You no longer find this distracting. It is simply part of the loom room's atmosphere, as familiar as the smell of wool and clay. The symmetrical knot you are tying is one of two common types, and it is the one preferred in this village for its durability and the fineness of its pile. It differs from the asymmetrical knot in that the wool wraps around both warp threads completely, the ends emerging together between the pair rather than wrapping around one thread and merely passing behind the other. This fall wrap gives the knot a firm hold on the warp, so that even if the rug is warped on for decades, the knots will not shift or loosen. You were taught this knot before you could speak, your small fingers guided by your father's larger ones, and the motion has become so ingrained that you could do it in complete darkness if the need arose. The thought of that childhood learning passes through your mind without leaving a trace, a brief flicker of memory that fades as the next knot forms under your hand. The basket of indigo wool is slowly depleting. You note this with the part of your attention that keeps track of supplies, and you know that you will need to card more fleece and dye it before this rug is finished. But that is a task for another day, and you do not interrupt the flow of knotting to dwell on it. Beside the indigo basket sits the basket of undyed rovings you prepared earlier, their soft coils pale and airy, and further along the shelf rests a smaller bundle of madder-dyed red wool left over from a previous project. The red will be used for the pattern when the indigo field reaches its intended height, but that point is still many rows away. For now, the indigo continues, row after row, building the deep, dark background against which the ivory diamonds will later shine. A faint sound reaches you from the caravanserai, the groan of a camel rising to its feet, followed by the jingle of its bell and the murmur of a driver's voice. The caravan is settling into its night rest, the camels being fed and watered, the traders closing their packs and lighting their small lamps. You do not look up from the loom, but the sound registers, a small punctuation in the quiet, and then it passes. Your hands continue their cycle. Select a tuft, loop, pull, cut, press, shuttle through, comb beat. The cycle is approximately 20 seconds from start to finish, though you never time it, and each cycle is nearly identical to the last. Yet within that near identity, there is infinite variation. The exact texture of each wool tuft, the precise angle of the knife blade, the slight adjustment of pressure needed for a warp thread that is a fraction looser than its neighbor. These micro-variations keep the work alive, prevent it from becoming mechanical, though an observer might see only the steady repetition of an ancient craft. You lose yourself in the knotting. The phrase is not quite right, because you do not lose yourself. Rather, you merge with the work, your awareness shrinking to the span of the warp and the feel of the wool. The boundary between your hands and the loom becomes soft and indistinct. The stool beneath you, the floor of packed clay, the walls of mud brick, the village outside, the valley beyond, all of these recede into a distant, unimportant background. The only reality is the knot you are tying now, and now, and now, each knot a small, complete world that contains everything needed within it. This state of absorption is not effortful, it is restful. A kind of waking sleep in which your hands know what to do and your mind follows along, quiet and unhurried. The comb hangs from its hook, and you reach for it again as you finish another row. The 3 beats sound clack, tap, tap, and the weft thread is seated, the pile compressed to the proper density. You hang the comb back on its hook and reach for the next tuft of wool. The indigo skein has worked its way loose from the bundle, and you pause for a moment to rewind it around your hand, coiling the wool into a neat ball that will not tangle as you draw from it. The ball fits in the palm of your hand, warm and firm, and you place it in the basket where it will unroll smoothly as you work. The small interruption is over in seconds, and the knotting resumes. The new ball feeding wool with a slight adjustment in tension that your fingers accommodate without thought. The evening deepens outside the high window. The rectangle of visible sky has turned from pale blue to a deeper indigo that nearly matches the wool in your hands, and a single star has appeared, faint and trembling, just above the mountain ridge. You glance at it once, a brief upward flick of your eyes, and then return to the warp. The star will still be there when you finish this row, and the row after that. There is no hurry, the night is long, and the weaving is patient. Your back remains straight on the stool, your shoulders relaxed. The posture of weaving is something you learned young, and you have never suffered the aches that some weavers complain of because you were taught to sit in a way that aligns the spine with the vertical beam, the body becoming an extension of the loom. Your feet dressed flat on the clay floor, one on either side of the treadle, and your arms move from the elbows rather than the shoulders, conserving energy. The economy of motion is part of the craft. Every unnecessary gesture has been pared away over the years, leaving only the essential movements smooth and flowing. An observer might watch you for an hour and never see a wasted motion, never see a hesitation or a fumble. The wool knows where to go, and your hands know how to take it there. You reach the end of a row and realize that the lamp oil is burning low. The flame has shrunk slightly and its light has taken on a reddish hue that makes the indigo wool look almost black. You set down the shuttle and rise from the stool, crossing to the shelf where a small clay bottle of oil waits. Pouring a thin stream into the lamp's reservoir, you watch the wick soak up the fresh oil and the flame revive, brightening and steadying. The light returns to its warm golden color and the warp threads regain their crisp visibility. You return to the stool, pick up the shuttle, and continue the row where you left off. The interruption has taken perhaps 30 seconds, and already it feels like a distant memory. The knotting resumes, and the rug grows. You have woven perhaps a finger's width since you lit the lamp, and the indigo pile is now deep enough to cast a shadow of its own when the light falls across it at an angle. The shadows of the individual knots are tiny, each one no bigger than a grain of rice, but together they create a texture that shifts subtly with the flicker of the flame. The rug seems almost alive, a dark, breathing surface that responds to the light and the air. You know that this liveliness will remain in the finished piece, that even after the rug is cut from the loom and washed and laid in the sun, the pile will continue to shift and change with the angle of the light and the direction of the hand that strokes it. This is one of the qualities that makes a hand-knotted rug different from any other floor covering. It is never quite the same from one moment to the next. A second star appears in the window, and then a third. You do not see them arrive. You simply notice them when you look up to rest your eyes from the close work of the warp. The stars are small and sharp in the dry mountain air, and they seem very close, as if you could reach up and touch them by stretching your arm through the window. The thought is fanciful and passes quickly, replaced by the more immediate sensation of wool between your fingers. You tie the next knot and the stars outside keep their silent watch over the valley. The caravanserai is fully quiet now. The camels have settled. The traders have extinguished their lamps, and the only movement is the slow patrol of the night watchman, an old man from the village who walks the perimeter with a staff and a small clay lantern. You can see his lantern bobbing in the distance, a tiny point of light that moves along the village wall and disappears around the corner of the caravanserai. His footsteps are soundless at this distance, but you imagine you can hear the soft crunch of his sandals on the packed earth, a sound as regular as a heartbeat. He will walk the perimeter until dawn, and then he will sleep in the shade of the gate, and the village will wake around him. You pause your knotting to stretch your fingers, flexing them open and closed a few times to ease the slight stiffness that has gathered in the joints. The pause is brief, and then your hands return to the wool, picking up the rhythm as if they had never left it. The next row begins, the tuft selected, the loop formed, the knot pulled tight. The knife cuts, the wool falls, the thumb presses, the shuttle passes, the comb beats, the next row begins. The cycle is unbroken, a slow, steady pulse that fills the room and the night. You think for a moment about the wool itself, about the sheep that grew it on the high summer pastures, about the shearers who clipped the fleece with their curved iron shears, about the washers who rinsed it in the cold mountain streams, about the carders and the spinners and the dyers who transformed it from a raw, greasy mass into the smooth-colored tufts in your basket. You do not know their names, and you never will, but their work is present in every knot you tie, a chain of labor that stretches back to the grassy slopes and the quiet sheep. The thought is not a sad one, nor a particularly happy one. It is simply a recognition, a moment of connection that flickers through your mind and then subsides, leaving behind only the wool and the warp and the steady movement of your hands. The lavender light of late evening has entirely faded, and the window shows only darkness now, a soft, velvety black that presses gently against the lattice. The lamp is the only light in the room, its circle of warmth enclosing you and the loom, in a small, intimate space. Beyond that circle the room is dark, the walls and the floor and the ceiling retreating into shadow. You feel cocooned, protected, wrapped in the quiet, as the warp is wrapped in the wool. The sensation is pleasant, and you allow yourself to sink into it, your hands continuing their work, while your mind drifts in a half-dream of texture and color and the feel of the wood under your fingers. The row is finished, and you decide that this will be the last row of the night. You pass the shuttle through the shed one final time, its hum louder in the silence, and beat the weft down with the comb. Clack, tap, tap. You run your palm over the woven surface, feeling the tight, even pile, the slight warmth of the wool from the lamp's heat. All is well. The rug is as it should be. You set the knife and shuttle on the beam, stretch your arms overhead, and rise from the stool, your knees making a soft sound that you ignore. The loom stands before you, its dark frame and pale cover a familiar shape against the shadowed wall. You will return to it in the morning, and the knot will be there, waiting, as patient as the valley itself. The sun stands straight above the courtyard, and the shadows have shrunk to small dark pools directly under the plane tree, and the water jar in the doorway. You feel the noon warmth on the back of your neck as you bend to tie the final knot of the row. A heat that is not yet oppressive, but carries the promise of the long afternoon. The indigo wool slips through your fingers one last time, the knife trims it, and you press the knot down with a thumb that has repeated this motion so many thousands of times that the ridge of the knuckle has a permanent smooth callus. You set the knife and shuttle on the loom beam, stretch your arms overhead, and rise from the stool. The loom room is warm now, the coolness of the dawn, a distant memory. The dust motes have settled and the air is still and dry, carrying the clean smell of wool and the faint, earthy scent of the clay walls. You walk to the door, stepping over the small heap of wool clippings that has accumulated at your feet, and you pause on the threshold to let your eyes adjust to the brightness outside. The courtyard flagstones are pale with sun, almost too bright to look at directly, and the leaves of the plane tree hang limp and still. Their green turns silvery on the edges. A cicada begins its long, buzzing drone from somewhere in the branches, a sound that will continue through the hottest part of the day. You cross to the clay basin that stands on a stone pedestal beside the kitchen alcove. The basin is half full of water from the morning, and you dip your hands into it, feeling the coolness run over your knuckles and wrists. The water is slightly murky, carrying a faint residue of clay from the jar, and it leaves your skin feeling soft and refreshed. You rub your palms together, working away the fine wool dust that has settled into the creases, and then you cup a little water and splash it onto your face. The coolness spreads across your forehead and cheeks, and you close your eyes for a moment, letting the water drip from your chin onto the flagstones. When you open your eyes again, the courtyard seems slightly brighter, slightly sharper, as if the water has washed away not just the dust, but a thin film of weariness. You dry your hands on a scrap of cotton cloth that hangs from a peg near the basin, and you walk across the courtyard to the shaded platform. The platform is a simple structure, a low wooden deck raised a few inches above the ground, covered by a roof of woven palm fronds supported on 4 rough-hewn posts. The fronds have been laid in overlapping layers so that the sun cannot pierce them, but small chinks of light filter through, casting a dappled pattern on the worn cushions below. The platform is the place where meals are taken during the warm months, where neighbors sit and talk in the evenings, where you sometimes nap in the late afternoon when the work is done. It is the heart of the house, as much as the loom room is its hands. A bowl of lentil soup and a round of flatbread wait under a clean cotton cloth on a low wooden tray. The cloth is slightly damp, keeping the food fresh, and when you lift it, you release a plume of fragrant steam. The smell is rich and savory, cooked lentils, turmeric, a hint of onion, and the faint sour note of dried lime. The soup is a deep golden color, speckled with dark green flecks of dried fenugreek and the occasional ruby of a whole peppercorn. The flatbread beside it is still warm from the courtyard oven, its surface blistered and brown in spots, dusted with a little flour. You settle onto the cushion, crossing your legs, and lift the wooden spoon that rests on the edge of the bowl. The first spoonful of soup is always the best, not because the flavor diminishes, but because the contrast between the heat of the kitchen and the coolness of the shaded platform sharpens the senses. You blow gently on the soup, watching the surface ripple, and then you taste it. The lentils are soft to the point of dissolving, and the turmeric gives them an earthy warmth that fills your mouth and spreads down your throat. The dried lime, which you saw in the jar the Caravan master sent, adds a bright sour tang that cuts through the heaviness of the lentils and makes the whole dish feel lighter. You chew a peppercorn carefully, releasing its sharp floral heat, and then you take another spoonful, slower this time, letting the flavors settle on your tongue. The flatbread tears easily, and you use a piece to scoop up a mouthful of lentils, the bread absorbing the broth and softening without falling apart. The bread has a slight smokiness from the oven, a taste that reminds you of the thornwood fire your neighbor lit this morning. You eat unhurriedly, spoon by spoon, bread by bread. The meal is simple, the same meal you've eaten on countless other noons, but it tastes complete, as if nothing could be added or removed to make it better. The shade of the platform, the warmth of the soup, the distant drone of the cicada, all combine into a moment of quiet satisfaction that asks for nothing more. A movement catches your eye. Your neighbor, the same woman who shares her flatbread with you on many mornings, walks across her courtyard carrying a leather bucket. She stops beside a young pomegranate bush that grows near the shared wall, its slender branches dotted with small, hard fruits that are just beginning to blush pink. She tips the bucket slowly, and a thin stream of water trickles out, darkening the dry soil around the base of the bush. The water soaks in quickly, and she pours a little more, moving the bucket in a slow circle so that the moisture spreads evenly. The leaves of the pomegranate bush seem to perk up even as you watch, their dull green taking on a glossier sheen. Your neighbor pauses, one hand on her hip, surveying the bush with a calm, assessing look. She picks off a yellowed leaf, drops it onto the soil, and then walks back toward her house with the empty bucket swinging gently at her side. The whole sequence passes without a word, a small domestic ritual that you have witnessed many times, and it settles into the quiet of the noon, like a stone settling into a pond. You return to your soup, which has cooled to the perfect temperature, warm enough to be comforting but not so hot that you must blow on each spoonful. The bowl is deeper than it looks, and you are only halfway through. You take another piece of flatbread and hold it in your left hand while you spoon with your right, alternating bites. The cicada pauses its drone for a moment, then resumes, its pitch slightly higher than before. A lizard scuffles across the top of the wall, pausing to bask in the sun, its tiny sides pulsing with rapid breaths. The courtyard is a world unto itself, enclosed and peaceful, and you are content to sit at its center and let the meal unfold at its own pace. Through the gap in the wall, you can see a slice of the caravanserai courtyard. A trader emerges from the arched gate, leading 2 camels on a single rope. The camels walk with their slow, rolling gait, their heads swaying on their long necks, their large feet padding softly on the packed earth. They are thirsty. You can tell by the way they stretch their necks toward the water trough even before they reach it, their nostrils flaring at the scent of water. The trader leads them to the trough beside the plane tree that grows just outside the caravanserai wall. A larger tree than yours, its trunk thick and gnarled with age. The trough is a long, hollowed log, dark with moisture, and it is kept full by a small channel that diverts water from the main irrigation stream. The camels lower their heads and drink, their throats working in deep, rhythmic swallows that you can hear even across the distance, a glugging, gurgling sound that is somehow satisfying. The trader stands by while the camels drink, one hand resting on the lead rope, his weight shifted onto one hip. He is a younger man, perhaps the son of one of the senior merchants, and his robe is a lighter blue than the caravan master's, less faded by sun and travel. He looks around the village with a mild curiosity, his gaze passing over the rooftops, the plane tree, the well, and then resting for a moment on your courtyard where you sit eating. He does not stare. His gaze moves on after a polite interval, and you return the courtesy by looking away, focusing on your soup. The camels finish drinking, lift their heads with water dripping from their chins, and the trader leads them back through the caravanserai gate. The rope trails behind them, stirring a small line of dust. You finish the lentil soup, scraping the last spoonful from the bottom of the bowl, and you wipe the bowl clean with the final piece of flatbread, which has now absorbed the remaining broth and taken on the color of turmeric. You eat the bread in 2 bites, then place the spoon in the empty bowl. Your stomach is full in a comfortable, settled way, not heavy, but grounded, as if the meal has anchored you more firmly to the cushion and the platform and the warm earth beneath. You pour yourself a cup of water from the clay jug that sits in the corner of the platform, and you drink it slowly, the water cool and clean. The cicada has fallen silent, perhaps worn out by its own noise, and the courtyard is very quiet now, a deep, humming quiet that seems to press against your eardrums. The caravan master appears at the caravanserai gate. He stands for a moment, as he did the day before, surveying the village with his calm, unhurried gaze. His blue robe is the same dusty shade, his grey beard is neatly trimmed, and he carries his long stick with the leather tassel. Beside him, the village headman walks out from the lane that leads to the mosque. The headman is an older man too, but clean-shaven, with a white turban and a brown cloak that he wears even in the heat. The 2 men meet in the open space between the caravanserai and the village well, and they greet each other with small formal gestures, a hand placed over the heart, a slight inclination of the head. They do not embrace, but their greeting carries the ease of long acquaintance, of many caravans and many cups of tea shared over the years. You watch them from your shaded platform, too far away to hear their words, but their voices carry in low, calm tones that blend with the rustle of the plane tree. They stand in the sun, neither seeming to mind the heat, and they talk. The caravan master gestures once toward the western road, then toward the caravanserai, and the headman nods slowly, his hand stroking his chin. Their conversation is not hurried. There are long pauses between sentences, pauses filled by the trickle of the water channel and the distant call of a hoopoe from the orchards. You cannot guess what they are discussing. Perhaps the toll for using the caravanserai, perhaps the condition of the road ahead, perhaps the price of the indigo you mean to examine in the morning. Whatever it is handled with the same measured gravity that governs all such exchanges in the village, a gravity that allows no room for haste or impatience. The two men talk for a while longer, and then the headman nods one final time and walks back toward the lane, his brown cloak swaying gently with his stride. The caravan master remains by the well for a moment, looking up at the mountains visible just beyond the rooftops, their peaks a hazy blue in the noon light. Then he turns and walks into the caravanserai, his stick tapping the ground once with each step. The open space is empty again, and the quiet returns. You set your empty cup on the tray and stretch your legs out on the cushion, leaning your back against one of the platform posts. The wood is smooth and cool, and it supports you comfortably. Your eyelids feel heavy, not with exhaustion but with the pleasant weight of a full stomach and the midday warmth. You do not intend to sleep, but you close your eyes for a short while, letting the darkness settle over you. The sounds of the village continue around you, the soft murmur of the water channel, the rustle of the plane tree leaves, the distant tapping of the blacksmith's hammer from the forge under the carob tree. The sounds are all familiar, each one a thread in the fabric of the afternoon, and your mind weaves them together without effort. You drift in a state between waking and sleeping, aware of your own breathing and the weight of your hands in your lap. Your hands, which have been busy since dawn, are still now, the fingers slightly curled, the calluses pale against the darker skin of your palms. You can feel the ghost of the loom in them, the memory of the warped threads and the wool and the knife, a faint tingling that is not unpleasant. You flex your fingers once, slowly, and then let them rest again. The shade of the palm fronds dapples your closed eyelids with tiny shifts of light and dark, a gentle rhythmic flickering that is soothing rather than distracting. A child's voice rises from the lane, a single high note of laughter that falls away quickly, swallowed by the thick walls. A donkey brays, far off, and is answered by another, closer. The sounds are like stones dropped into a still pond, their ripples spreading outward and fading. You follow them into the quiet, not sleeping, but not fully awake either, suspended in the warm, soft middle of the day. After a time, you open your eyes. The sun has moved a little, the shadows have lengthened by a finger's width, and the quality of the light has shifted from the harsh white of noon to a slightly mellower gold. The cicada has resumed its drone, but it seems lazier now, its buzz slowing periodically, as if it too is considering a nap. You sit up, rubbing your eyes with the back of your hand, and you look around the courtyard as if seeing it for the first time. The water jar, the basin, the plane tree, the kitchen alcove, all are as they were, but the brief rest has given them a refreshed clarity, a slight sharpening of edges and colors. You gather the bowl, the spoon, and the empty cup, and you carry them to the basin. Washing them is a simple task. You scoop water from the jar, scrub the bowl with a scrap of palm fiber, rinse it, and set it upside down on the stone draining board to dry. The spoon gets the same treatment, as does the cup. The motions are unhurried and meditative, your hands enjoying the cool water and the smooth texture of the clay. When everything is clean, you dry your hands on the cotton cloth and look toward the loom room doorway. The loom is visible as a dark shape in the interior dimness, the indigo wool on its baskets, a splash of deep color against the pale warp. It waits for you, patient as always, and you feel a quiet pull toward it. Not an urgent call, but a steady, gentle tug. In the caravanserai, the midday rest is coming to an end. You see a few traders emerging from the arcade, stretching, chatting in low voices. One of them lights a small clay pipe, and the smoke drifts upward in a thin blue curl. The camels have risen from their kneeling positions, and the drivers are checking the straps on the pack frames, preparing for the afternoon's small tasks of trade and maintenance. The caravan will stay another night, you remember, so there is no rush to visit the colors today. They will still be there in the morning, and the morning will be a better time for careful looking, when the light is clear and your eyes are fresh. You walk back across the courtyard, the flankstones warm under the soles of your sandals, and you pause at the loom room door. The interior is dim and cool, a welcome relief from the brightness outside. The oil lamp has been extinguished, but enough light comes through the high window and the open door to work by. You step inside, the clay floor smooth and slightly cool underfoot, and you stand for a moment before the loom. The warp threads gleam faintly, the indigo pile rises in its dense, even field, and the smell of wool and dust and old wood enfolds you like a familiar garment. You pick up the knife from the beam, test its edge with your thumb, and settle onto the stool. The cushion is still warm from your body, and you shift slightly to find the comfortable position. The first tuft of indigo wool is in your hand before you consciously decide to pick it up. You loop it around the next pair of warp threads, pull it through, cut it, press it down. The motion is as natural as breathing, and the afternoon knotting begins, picking up the rhythm exactly where you left it. The meal and the rest, and the quiet conversation by the well have not interrupted the work. They have refreshed it, renewed the energy that flows from your hands into the wool. The rug grows, row by slow row, and the sun continues its steady journey westward, and the village settles into the long, peaceful stretch of the afternoon. You return to the stool, and the afternoon stretches before you like a long, golden road, with no turns and no particular destination. The warp threads stand in their pale ranks, the indigo field has risen to the height you planned, and now it is time to begin the pattern that will sit at the center of the rug. You reach for a different basket, the one that holds the madder-dyed wool, and your fingers close around a tuft of deep red that glows like a banked ember in the muted light of the room. The red wool is slightly coarser than the indigo, the madder root having given it not only its color, but a faint, pleasant smell of earth and dried flowers. And you roll the tuft between your fingers to test its spring before you begin the first knot of the new section. The pattern you are weaving is an old one, older than your father and his father before him. A design of repeating diamond shapes that the village weavers call the eye of the partridge. Each diamond is small, requiring 12 rows of knots to complete, and its outline is formed in ivory wool that is being left undyed. Its natural cream color, a stark contrast to the deep red that will fill the center. The diamonds are not merely decorative, they carry a meaning that has been passed down so many generations that no one remembers the original story, only that the pattern brings protection to the household that owns the rug. You do not think about this meaning while you work, but it lives in the back of your mind like a half-remembered song, a quiet presence that guides your fingers as they move from knot to knot. You tie the first red knot along the left edge, where the border will eventually transition to the central field. The madder wool slides through your fingers with a slightly different friction than the indigo, a little more grip, and you adjust your pressure accordingly without conscious thought. The knife cuts, the thumb presses, and the red begins to spread across the warp, a warm tide rising against the dark shore of the indigo border. You work from left to right, placing the red knots in a solid band that will serve as the background for the first row of diamonds, and the color seems to warm the very air around your hands. When the first row of solid red is complete, you begin the second row, and here you introduce the ivory wool. The pattern requires you to count the warp pairs between each ivory knot, but you do not count with numbers, you count with your fingers, a soft tapping of your thumb against the side of your index finger that marks the intervals without disturbing the rhythm of the knotting. A group of 4 red knots, then 2 ivory knots, then 4 red again, and so on across the width of the rug. The ivory wool is from the same fleece as the warp threads, and it has a brightness that catches the light, each ivory knot a small star against the red and indigo. You pull the ivory tufts with the same care you give the dyed wool, and the knife trims them just as close, the clippings falling to mix with the colored snippets on the clay floor. The afternoon light has begun its slow transformation. At noon, the light through the high window was a hard white shaft that divided the room into sharp zones of brightness and shadow. Now that light is mellowing, taking on a honey tone that softens the edges of everything it touches. The wall opposite the window, which was harshly illuminated earlier, now glows with a gentle warmth, the plaster seeming to hold the light rather than reflect it. The shadows of the warp threads, which at noon were short and crisp, are beginning to stretch, each one elongating eastward across the beaten earth floor like a thin finger pointing toward the coming evening. The dust motes which had vanished during the brightest hours are visible again, floating slowly in the golden shaft, their paths lazy and unhurried. You work through the third row of the pattern and the diamonds begin to take their shape. Each diamond is constructed so that its outline appears gradually, row by row, the ivory knots shifting inward by one warp pair on each side until they meet at the center. The progression is geometric, perfectly regular, and yet it never feels mechanical. Each diamond has its own small character, its own slight variation in the way the wool lies or the way the light falls across it. You notice these variations without remarking on them, accepting them as part of the living quality of the rug. The red field fills in around the ivory outlines, and the pattern emerges like a message written in a language you have known since childhood. Your hands maintain their steady rhythm, the symmetrical knot, the cut, the press, the pass of the shuttle, the beat of the comb. The sounds are the same as they were in the morning, but they seem softer now, as if the changing light has also changed the acoustics of the room. The snip of the knife is less sharp, more like a whisper of metal against wool. The comb's three-beaked tap is lower, rounder, blending with the distant murmur of the caravanserai that drifts through the open door. The caravan noises, which were lively at midday, have dwindled as the merchants and drivers retreat to the shaded arcades for their own afternoon rest. The camels have settled again, their groans occasional and distant, and the traders' voices are reduced to a low continuous hum that is indistinguishable from the rustle of the plane tree. An hour passes without your noticing it. You have completed 6 more rows, and the first row of diamonds is halfway to its apex. You pause to run your palm over the woven section, feeling the transition from indigo to red, from solid field to pattern center. The red pile is as dense as the indigo, but it feels warmer under your hand, as if the color itself contains heat. The ivory knots stand out in subtle relief, their undyed fibers catching the light differently from the dyed wool, and when you stroke them with the grain, they feel silkier, smoother. You find no loose knots, no uneven patches, and you allow yourself a small internal nod before returning to the work. The light shifts again, from honey to amber, and the room takes on a richness that makes the colors seem deeper and more saturated. The indigo border, which was a dark blue in the morning light, now looks almost purple in the shadows, the blue deepening toward violet in a way that reminds you of the sky just after sunset. The madder red glows like the heart of the fire, and the ivory wool turns the color of fresh cream, warm and slightly golden. You notice how the red wool looks different in this light, warmer, as if it holds the sun inside its fibers, and you pause for a moment to hold a tuft up to the window, watching the light filter through the thin strands. The fibers seem to glow from within, each one a tiny thread of captured sunlight, and you lower your hand and continue weaving with a renewed appreciation for the madder root and the dyer who prepared it. Your neighbor's daughter appears in the doorway, a small girl with bare feet and a serious expression. She carries a clay bowl of fresh water, holding it with both hands as if it were a precious offering, and she sets it down near the door without a word, her footsteps soundless on the clay floor. You glance up and give her a small nod of thanks, and she turns and runs back to the courtyard, her bare feet pattering on the flagstones. The old bowl of water, which had grown warm and slightly cloudy, you set aside to pour on the pomegranate bush later, and you dip your fingers in the fresh bowl, touching the coolness to your forehead. The water is cold from the jar in the shade, and it refreshes you without breaking the rhythm of the work. You dry your hand on your sleeve and pick up the next tuft of wool. The diamonds continue to grow. You are on the 8th row of the first full diamond now, and the ivory outline is narrowed to a single pair of warp threads at the center. In the next row, the outline will close and the diamond will be complete, its ivory frame enclosing a small field of red that exactly matches the larger field around it. The symmetry is satisfying in a quiet way, a small resolution that occurs every 12 rows, and you look forward to it without anticipation, the way you look forward to the moment when the sun touches the mountain ridge at dusk. It is simply part of the weaving, part of the slow, steady progress from top to bottom. The shadow of the window lattice has crossed the floor and is now climbing the opposite wall, its squares stretched into long parallelograms that lean toward the ceiling. The room is noticeably dimmer, though still bright enough to work by, and the contrast between the lit areas and the shadowed areas has softened into a gentle gradient. The oil lamp hangs unlit from its hook. You will not need it for a while yet. Outside the window, the slice of visible sky has paled from blue to a milky gold, and the mountain ridge is beginning to sharpen, as the haze of the afternoon lifts and the air clears. A coolness is starting to creep into the breeze that comes through the window, a hint of the evening that is still an hour away, but already sending its first messengers. The caravanserai is waking from its afternoon lull. You hear a few voices calling across the courtyard, the clatter of a copper pot, the bleat of a goat that one of the traders is leading to the trough. The smoke from a cook fire drifts past your doorway, carrying the smell of roasting onions and something sweeter, maybe carrots or beets. The caravan is preparing its evening meal, and the sounds are gentle, domestic, the sounds of people settling into the comfort of a safe resting place. You let them wash over you without attending to them, your focus narrowing to the span of the warp and the wool between your fingers. You tie the 11th row of the diamond, and the ivory outline is now a single knot at the very center. Your thumb presses it down with extra care, seating it precisely, and you move on to the 12th row. In this row, the outline closes, the two sides of the diamond meeting in a seamless point. The completed shape sits neatly in the red field, its cream-colored frame crisp and regular. You pause for a moment to look at it, your hands resting on the beam, and the diamond looks back at you like a quiet eye. The moment is brief, and then you move on to the next diamond, beginning the first row of its base at the appropriate distance from the first. The pattern repeats, and you fall back into the rhythm, the counting in your fingers marking the intervals with a soft, steady beat. The afternoon wears on toward evening. You have completed 3 diamonds now, and a 4th is underway, its ivory outline halfway to its apex. The red field is deepening as the light changes, taking on a burgundy tone in the shadows, and the indigo border above it has darkened to the color of a night sky before the stars come out. The warp threads, which were bright in the morning, now appear gray in the dimness, but they are still visible, and your fingers know their positions by touch as much as by sight. You could continue working even if the room were darker, relying on the memory of your hands and the texture of the wool to guide you. But the light is not yet gone, and you are grateful for the warm amber glow that still fills the room. A camel groans in the caravanserai, a long, low sound that seems to come from the earth itself. You hear a driver's answering call, a soft command that is more like a reassurance. And then the sound subsides. The evening star is not yet visible, but the sky through the window has deepened to a richer gold, the color of ripe apricots, and the first hint of rose is appearing along the mountain ridge. The afternoon is almost over, but it has been a full and peaceful one, filled with the quiet work of the red wool and the ivory wool, and the slow, steady construction of the diamonds. You feel a gentle satisfaction that is too mild to be called pride, more like the contentment of a well-tended garden, the knowledge that things are as they should be. You finish the row you are on and reach for the next tuft of red wool, but your hand pauses in the basket. The light has dimmed enough that the red and the indigo are becoming difficult to distinguish, their colors merging into a common darkness. You decide to work one more row and then cover the loom for the evening. The decision is made without regret. There will be tomorrow, and the next day, and the day after that, and the diamonds will still be there, waiting to be completed. You tie the final knots of the row with careful attention, making sure each one is seated properly despite the fading light, and you beat the weft down with the comb one last time. The 3 taps sound louder in the evening quiet, a small ceremony that marks the end of the afternoon's labor. You set the knife and shuttle on the beam and rise from the stool, your legs stiff from the long sitting, but not painfully so. You stretch your arms overhead, feeling the pull in your shoulders, and then you walk to the door and look out at the courtyard. The plane tree is a dark silhouette against the amber sky, and the first bat is flitting between the branches, a quick, silent shape that appears and disappears like a thought. The water channel continues its patient murmur, and a few cooking fires glow orange by the caravanserai wall, their smoke rising straight up in the still evening air. The smell of baking bread reaches you, mingling with the scent of thorn wood and the faint, lingering aroma of madder root from your hands. You stand there for a while, leaning against the doorframe, letting the day's accumulation of small movements settle into your muscles. The afternoon has been good, the work has been steady, and the rug has grown. You think of the diamonds you will weave tomorrow, the way the ivory wool will feel in your fingers, the way the light will change from morning to noon to evening, all over again. The thought is peaceful, and you hold it for a moment before turning back into the room. You take the length of undyed cotton from its peg and drape it over the warp, covering the woven section and tucking the edges around the side beams. The loom becomes a quiet shape in the dimness, and you leave it there, knowing it will wait patiently through the night, holding the pattern in its warp threads until your hands return to continue it. As dusk gathers, the light through the high window fades from amber to a soft grey, and the warp threads begin to lose their distinctness, merging into a single pale curtain. You are tying the last knot of a row when you notice that the red wool and the ivory wool have become difficult to tell apart, their colours subdued by the deepening dimness. You finish the knot anyway, your fingers knowing the motion even when your eyes can barely confirm it, and you press it down with your thumb. The shuttle passes through the shed, its whisper louder in the evening quiet, and the comb beats 3 times, the sound seeming to hang in the still air a moment longer than usual, before fading into the general hush. You set the knife and shuttle on the beam and rest your hands on your thighs, feeling the slight ache in the knuckles that comes from a full day of knotting. The ache is not unpleasant. It is the same ache your father used to speak of, calling it the weaver's prayer, a small reminder that the body has done its work well. You flex your fingers open and closed a few times, watching the shadows of your hands move against the clay floor, and then you turn your attention to the day's weaving, running your palm over the indigo border, the red field, and the 3 completed diamonds. You feel the tight, even pile, the subtle variations in texture between the dyed and undyed wool, the overall smoothness that speaks of consistent tension and careful knotting. You check for any gap or irregularity, the way you always do, your fingers moving slowly across the surface like a reader tracing a line of text. The wool pushes back with a gentle, resilient pressure. Near the right edge, you find a single knot that sits slightly higher than its neighbours, its ends not fully seated, and you press it down with extra care, smoothing the area around it until the imperfection vanishes. You find nothing else amiss. The warp threads are straight, the weft is tight, and the diamonds sit evenly in their red field. A quiet satisfaction settles in your chest, the same satisfaction you feel every evening when the work proves true, and you let it rest there without needing to name it or hold on to it. The room is almost too dim to count warp threads properly, and you know it is time to stop. You reach for the length of undyed cotton that hangs from its peg on the wall, a piece of cloth woven long ago for this sole purpose, its edges frayed and soft from years of handling. Draping it over the warp, you tuck the corners around the side beams, making sure the cloth covers the entire woven section. The cotton settles over the rug like a sheet over a sleeping child, and the loom becomes a quiet, ghostly presence in the corner, its walnut frame barely visible in the twilight. You leave the knife and the shuttle on the beam, where they will wait for the morning, and you step back from the stool. Now the muezzin's chant rises from the small mosque at the village centre, the voice carrying across the rooftops with a clarity that the daylight sounds never quite achieve. The call is old and familiar, its melody shaped by generations of the same family who have served the mosque since before anyone can remember. The muezzin is an older man with a slight tremor in his voice, but that tremor only adds to the beauty, a human fragility that makes the chant feel more intimate, more connected to the village and the valley. You pause where you stand, one hand resting on the doorframe, and you let the sound wash over you. It blends so completely with the crickets and the rustle of the poplar leaves that you cannot separate them. The chant and the evening and the natural world all woven together like the wool and the warp on your loom. The call fades, the last syllable hanging in the air for a heartbeat and then dissolving into the dusk. The silence that follows is not empty, but full, a deep quiet that seems to breathe. The crickets continue their steady pulse, the poplars whisper, and the water channel murmurs its endless song. A dog barks once, far down the valley, and the sound travels through the still air like a stone skipping across a pond, touching the silence and then sinking into it. You stand in the doorway, letting the evening settle around you, and you feel the boundary between the day and the night as a soft, porous membrane rather than a sharp line. You walk to the clay basin in the courtyard, your sandals making a soft scuffing sound on the flagstones. The water in the jar is still cool from the morning, and you pour it over your hands, rubbing away the fine wool dust that has gathered in the creases of your palms and between your fingers. The water darkens slightly as it runs off, carrying tiny fibers of indigo and madder and ivory wool into the drainage channel. You splash your face, cupping the water in both hands and pressing it to your forehead and cheeks, and the coolness is a small shock that clears the last cobwebs of the afternoon from your mind. You dry your face and hands on the cotton cloth, and you look up at the sky. The evening star has appeared above the mountain ridge, a single point of white light that seems to pulse gently, though you know the pulsing is in your own eyes and not in the star itself. The sky around it is a deep, transparent blue, darker than the indigo wool, but with the same sense of depth, and higher up the blue fades into a pale lavender that still holds a memory of the sun. The mountain ridge is a jagged black line against this luminous backdrop, each peak and valley sharp and clear in the dry evening air. You stand looking at the star for a long moment, and the star looks back, silent and steady, as it has looked on this village every evening since the mountains rose and the valley formed. The every smells of burning thornwood and baking bread, the scents drifting from the courtyard ovens that are being lit for the evening meal. A few cooking fires glow orange by the caravanserai walls, their flames just visible through the arched gate, and the figures of the traders move around them in a slow, shadowy dance. The smoke rises straight up in the still air, forming thin columns that catch the last light of the sky and turn pale gold before dissipating. You can hear the low murmur of voices from the caravanserai, not words but a continuous, comfortable hum that is indistinguishable from the crickets and the poplars. The camels are settled for the night, their bells silent, their long necks curved down toward the packed earth. You walk to the stone step at the edge of the courtyard, the same step where your father used to sit in the evenings, and you lower yourself onto it. The stone is still warm from the afternoon sun, and the warmth seeps through your clothing and into your muscles, a gentle heat that loosens the small tightnesses in your back and shoulders. You lean against the wall, the mud brick still holding a faint residue of the day's heat, and you stretch your legs out in front of you, crossing your ankles. Your hands rest in your lap, the fingers slightly curled, and you let them be still. The day's accumulation of small movements begins to settle into your muscles. You can feel each part of the weaving in a different part of your body, the carding in your shoulders, the knotting in your fingers and wrists, the sitting in your lower back and hips. None of it is pain. It is more like a memory, a record of the hours written in the tissues and sinews. You breathe slowly, drawing the evening air deep into your lungs, and with each exhale, you feel a layer of tension release. A small letting go that spreads outward from your center. The crickets seem to grow louder as your own stillness deepens, or perhaps they are simply becoming more numerous as the night advances. A bat flits across the courtyard, a quick, dark shape against the fading sky, its flight erratic and soundless. You watch it for a moment, following its zigzag path between the plane tree and the wall, and then it vanishes into the dusk. Another bat appears, and another, their small bodies moving with a speed that seems impossible, as if they are not flying but swimming through the air. They hunt the insects that have risen from the irrigation channel, and their presence signals the full arrival of evening, the transition from the diurnal world to the nocturnal one. The village is settling into its night rhythm. You hear the sound of a wooden door closing, the scrape of a bolt being drawn, the soft goodnights called between neighbors. A light appears in the window of the house across the lane, a warm yellow glow that flickers and then steadies. The blacksmith's hammer has been silent for hours, and the forge is dark. The water carrier has stored his leather bucket and gone home. Even the dogs have stopped their occasional barking and found their spots under the eaves and in the doorways, curling into tight circles with their tails over their noses. In the caravanserai, the cook fires are burning low, and the traders are gathering in small groups under the arcade, their voices low and lazy, their pipes sending up thin curls of smoke that catch the firelight. The caravan master is sitting on a carpet spread over the stones, a clay cup of tea in his hand, his blue robe dark in the shadows. He is speaking with one of the senior merchants. Their conversation a slow exchange of words with long pauses between them, a conversation that has no urgency, because the caravan will not leave until the day after tomorrow. You can see them from your stone step, small figures in the distance, and their calmness is contagious, a reminder that there is no need to rush, that the night is long and the road will wait. Your neighbor walks past her doorway, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders against the cooling air, and she pauses when she sees you sitting on the step. She raises a hand in a small, silent greeting, and you raise yours in return. She continues to the pomegranate bush, checks the soil with a touch of her fingers, and then walks back inside. The brief connection is wordless but warm. The kind of connection that comes from years of living side by side, of sharing flatbread and tea and the quiet rhythm of the seasons. The evening star has been joined by others now, a scattering of bright points across the darkening sky. You can see the 3 stars of the Hunter's Belt rising above the eastern ridge, and the faint, misty band of the Milky Way beginning to emerge directly overhead. The stars are so many and so bright in the dry mountain air that you could spend hours counting them, but you do not count them. You simply let them be there. A silent, glittering roof over the valley. Somewhere in the village a child asks a question, and a parent answers in a low, soothing tone, and then the voices fade and the stars remain. You think about the rug waiting under its cotton cover in the loom room, the indigo border, the red field, the 3 completed diamonds, the 4th diamond that is half finished and will be waiting for you in the morning. You picture the pattern in your mind, the way the ivory outlines will close, the way the red will fill in around them, the way the whole design will slowly reveal itself row by patient row. The thought is not a plan or a goal. It is more like a quiet anticipation. The same feeling you have when you look at a fruit tree in blossom and imagine the fruit that will come. The rug will grow and you will be there to help it grow, and that is enough. A cool breeze moves through the courtyard, rustling the plane tree leaves and carrying the scent of wild thyme from the hills above the village. The breeze is gentle, barely strong enough to lift a strand of wool, and it passes over your face like a soft hand, cooling the skin that was warmed by the day's sun. You close your eyes for a moment, listening to the leaves and the crickets and the distant murmur of the irrigation channel, and you feel the day's accumulation of small movements settle deeper into your muscles, transforming from activity into rest. When you open your eyes again, the sky is fully dark and the stars are brilliant. The cooking fires in the caravanserai have dimmed to embers, and the traders have retired to their rooms. The arcade is dark, and the camels are silent. The village is asleep or settling towards sleep, and the only lights are the stars and the single warm window across the lane. You rise from the stone step, your body moving slowly, and you walk to the kitchen alcove to fetch a small cup of water before bed. The clay cup is cool in your hand and you drink standing up, looking out at the courtyard and the plane tree and the stars beyond. The loom room is dark when you return to it, the cotton-covered loom a pale shape against the far wall. You will sleep in the small adjoining room on a simple cot with a wool blanket and a cushion stuffed with carded fleece. The cot is low and firm, and the blanket smells faintly of lavender from the sprigs your neighbor tucks into the storage chest. You cross the loom room, your bare feet silent on the packed clay, and you pause for a moment beside the loom. Through the cotton cover you can feel the faint, warm smell of the wool, and you touch the cloth lightly with your fingertips. Tomorrow the weaving will continue. Tonight the loom rests, and you rest, and the valley rests. All is well, and the evening folds itself around you like a soft, dark blanket, full of stars and crickets and the quiet certainty of another day to come. You lie down on the simple cot in the corner of the loom room, the wool blanket pulled up to your shoulders, the cushion under your head stuffed with carded fleece that still carries a faint scent of the high pastures. The room is dark, the window a square of deep blue where a few stars are just visible through the wooden lattice. The cotton cover drapes the loom, turning it into a soft grey shape that seems to breathe in the slow movement of the air. You close your eyes and feel the day's work settle into a deeper stillness, the small aches in your shoulders and fingers fading into the warmth of the blanket. Your breathing slows, and the boundary between waking and sleep becomes as thin and porous as the cotton cloth on the loom. The village sinks into a quiet so deep that you can hear the irrigation channel trickling past the garden wall, a sound that is always present but rarely noticed. At night it becomes distinct, a low, watery murmur that runs beneath the other sounds like a thread through fabric. The channel carries snowmelt from the distant peaks, and its voice is constant and patient, as if it has been speaking since the mountains were formed and will continue speaking long after the village is forgotten. You listen to it without listening, the sound wrapping around you like a second blanket, steady and soothing. A dog barks once somewhere near the well, a single, sharp note that cuts through the quiet and then fades, A moment later, another dog answers from farther down the valley, its bark fainter and more drawn out, a softer echo that seems to come from another world. Then the silence returns, thicker than before, filling the space the barks have left behind. You are aware of the barks in the way you are aware of a stone dropped into still water. The ripples spread and then disappear, and the surface becomes smooth again. You turn slightly on the cot, adjusting the blanket, and your breathing deepens. The caravanserai gates are closed. You did not see them close, but you know they are shut because the night watchman makes his rounds at the same hour every evening, sliding the heavy wooden bar into its iron brackets. The sound, a low, grinding thud that you have heard so many times it has become part of your own sleeping rhythm. The gates will not open again until dawn, and inside the great courtyard the camels are lying on the packed earth, their long legs folded under them, their large eyes half closed in the darkness. They chew their cud with a slow, grinding motion of their jaws, a rhythm that never stops, and their soft groans vibrate through the ground like the purring of enormous cats. The sound travels through the earth and the village walls and the clay floor of the loom room, a low, continuous hum that you feel more than you hear, a gentle tremor that rocks you deeper into sleep. The loom stands covered a few steps from your cot. Under the undyed cotton cloth, the warp threads hold their tension, the indigo border and the red field and the ivory diamonds waiting in patient stillness. The pattern you were weaving is suspended mid-row, the half-finished diamond caught in the moment you set down the knife. The wool does not stir, the shuttle does not shift, the comb hangs motionless from its hook. The loom is a ghostly shape in the darkness, a quiet companion that has watched over your sleep for as many years as you can remember. You do not think about it consciously, but some part of you knows it is there, and that knowledge is a small, steady comfort. A night bird calls from the plane tree, a single, liquid note that rises and falls like a question no one needs to answer. The call is not repeated. You stir briefly, your eyelids fluttering, your hand moving to the edge of the blanket, and then you settle again. The bird's voice slides into your dream without disturbing it, becoming a thread of sound woven into a fabric of darkness and stillness. The dream is gentle and without images, a sense of drifting through warm, woolly clouds that smell of lanolin and clay, the sensation of floating in the indigo vat where the dye soaks into the fibers, turning them from pale cream to deep blue. There is no story, no narrative, only color and texture, and the slow, rhythmic pulse of your own heartbeat. The stars wheel over the village in their slow, silent parade. The hunter's belt has climbed higher now, its 3 bright stars tilting westward, and the Milky Way stretches from horizon to horizon like a river of faint light. The mountains hold the dark like a blanket, their ridges black against the starry sky, their valleys filled with deep shadow. No wind disturbs the plane tree, no cloud passes over the moon, which has not yet risen above the eastern peaks. The air is still and cool, carrying the faint, clean smell of stone and the distant memory of snow. The village sleeps under this vast, quiet canopy, its mud brick houses huddled together like a flock of sheep, its lanes empty, its doors closed. Your neighbor's house is silent. The pomegranate bush stands in her courtyard, its small fruits dark and invisible among the leaves. The water jar beside her door is full, the surface of the water motionless and black. The flatbread oven is cold, the embers long since turned to grey ash. She sleeps on a cot much like yours, her shawl folded at the foot of the bed, her breathing slow and even. The same night bird that called from your plane tree might have called from hers as well, or perhaps she dreamed of the voice without hearing it. The whole village is bound together by these small invisible threads of sound and silence, and the shared rhythm of sleep. The caravanserai is a world of its own within the village walls. In the arcade, the traders sleep on thin mattresses spread over carpets, their heads resting on saddlebags, their bodies wrapped in striped wool cloaks. The caravan master lies in a small room off the main courtyard, his blue robe hung from a peg, his stick propped in the corner. His sleep is as calm as his waking, undisturbed by the groans of the camels or the occasional shuffle of a driver rising to check the animals. He has slept in 100 such caravanserais along 1,000 miles of road, and the sounds of the night are as familiar to him as his own name. The camels continue their slow, grinding chew, their long throats working in a rhythm that matches the pulse of the stars. The water channel trickles on. It does not sleep. It flows through the village, past the garden walls, past the plane tree and the pomegranate bush, past the caravanserai trough where the camels drank in the afternoon. It carries small flecks of mica and tiny water beetles, and it rounds the corner of the blacksmith's forge and disappears into the orchards below the village. There the water spreads out into a network of smaller channels, feeding the roots of almond trees and apricot trees and the rows of chickpeas that grow in the flat fields. The trees drink in the darkness, their roots drawing up moisture, their leaves folding slightly as the night cools. The whole valley is a living thing, breathing slowly, and the water is its blood, circulating even as everything else rests. You turn again in your sleep, shifting onto your side, one arm tucked under the cushion. The blanket slips a little, and a coolness touches your shoulder, but you do not wake. The small discomfort is absorbed into the dream, which shifts from indigo clouds to a sensation of walking through the high pastures, where the sheep graze, the grass soft under your sandals, the sky, a pale, washed blue. There are no sheep in the dream, only the grass and the sky and a sense of open space that is the opposite of the loom room. But the dream is not vivid. It is hazy and distant, like a landscape seen through a thin curtain, and it fades before it fully forms. Another dog barks, closer this time, perhaps the same dog that barked earlier, now roused by some small night animal crossing the lane. The bark is hoarse and brief, and no other dog answers. The silence that follows is deeper than before, as if the night itself has grown denser. You do not stir. Your breathing remains slow and regular, the breath rising and falling with a rhythm that matches the trickle of the water channel and the distant grinding chew of the camels. The moon rises above the eastern ridge. It is a thin crescent, a sliver of silver light that does little to illuminate the village but adds a faint ethereal glow to the mountains. The starlight is still the dominant light, cold and clear, and it casts no shadows, only a general, silvery dimness that makes the mud brick walls look like pale bones. The crescent moon climbs slowly, following the path the sun will take in the morning, and its light touches the high window of the loom room, falling across the cotton cover of the loom. The cloth glows faintly, a pale rectangle suspended in the darkness, and then the moon moves on, and the room is dark again. You might stir briefly when the moonlight touches your face, a faint cool sensation that passes as quickly as it comes. Your eyelids flutter, and a fragment of a thought drifts through your mind, the indigo wool, the red wool, the curve of the knife. But the thought dissolves before it can become a full idea, and sleep returns quickly, wrapping you in its soft, heavy folds. The cot is comfortable, the blanket is warm, and there is no need to wake. There is nothing to wake for, and nothing to worry about. The night is long and peaceful, and it holds you as gently as the warp holds the wool. The camels in the caravanserai shift their weight, one of them rising briefly to adjust its legs before settling back down with a deep, groaning sigh. The sound rolls through the ground, a low vibration that passes under the village like a distant drum. The other camels do not stir. They are used to the movements of their companions, and they continue chewing their cud in their slow, steady rhythm. The driver who sleeps near them opens one eye, registers the sound, and closes it again. There is no danger, no disturbance, only the ordinary nightlife of the caravan. The poplar trees along the village wall rustle faintly as a small breeze moves through them, a breath of air that comes from the north and carries the coolness of the mountains. The breeze passes through the lattice of your window, stirring the air in the loom room, just enough to make the cotton cover on the loom sway slightly. The warp threads beneath the cover do not move. The tension holds them firm. The wool in the baskets does not stir. It is heavy and dense, settled into its containers like a sleeping animal. The breeze touches your cheek, and you pull the blanket a little higher without waking, your hand moving automatically in the darkness. The night watchman makes his slow round along the village wall, his staff tapping the ground with a soft, regular thud, his play lantern casting a small circle of warm light that bobs along the packed earth. He walks the same path he has walked every night for 30 years, and his feet know every stone and every hollow. He pauses at the caravanserai gate to check the bar, finds it secure, and continues on. His lantern passes the well, the plane tree, the blacksmith's forge, and then disappears around the corner of the mosque. The tapping of his staff fades into the distance, and the silence returns. The water jar in your courtyard stands motionless, its clay surface beaded with moisture that is condensed in the cool night air. The droplets catch the faint starlight and glisten like tiny pearls before they grow heavy and slide down the curve of the jar into the shallow dish below. The dish is full, a dark mirror that reflects a single star, and the water in the dish trembles slightly with the vibration of the camel groans. A tiny circular ripple that spreads and disappears, spreads and disappears. Your sleep deepens into a state without dreams, a vast, empty restfulness that is more like the sleep of the mountains than the sleep of a person. Your body does its quiet work. Your heart beats slowly. Your lungs fill and empty. Your muscles repair the small tears of the day's labor. The calluses on your fingers and palms thicken imperceptibly, and the skin on your thumb, worn smooth by a million presses against the knots, replenishes itself cell by cell. The wool dust that lingered in your hair and on your clothing settles onto the blanket and the cushion, becoming part of the room's slow accumulation of fibers and dust and time. The crescent moon climbs higher, crossing the window and disappearing beyond the roof. The room is dark again, the cotton cover on the loom invisible, the baskets of wool mere shadows in the deeper shadow. The knife and shuttle rest on the beam, their shapes blurred and indistinct. The stool sits empty, its worn surface cool and smooth. Nothing moves, nothing makes a sound except the water channel and the camels and the distant intermittent bark of a dog that has long since forgotten what it was barking at. The night is more than half over when the first subtle shift occurs, a change so slight that only the rooster notices, stirring in its roost behind the house, its internal clock beginning to anticipate the dawn. The rooster does not crow. It simply ruffles its feathers and shifts its weight from one foot to the other, a small, instinctive preparation. The stars have wheeled farther westward, and the eastern sky is still dark, but a quality of the darkness has changed, a thinning of the blackness that is not yet light, but is no longer the dense darkness of midnight. The air cools slightly, the temperature dropping to its lowest point before the sun returns, and the breeze from the mountains strengthens just a little, carrying a sharper edge of cold. You feel the temperature change in your sleep, and you pull the blanket tight around your shoulders, curling into a warmer position. Your breathing pauses for a moment, adjusts, and then continues. The dreamless sleep gives way to a new dream, this one slightly more formed. You are walking through the village at dusk, and the loom is following you, floating silently behind you like a faithful dog. You are not frightened. You are simply walking, and the loom is walking with you, its walnut frame gleaming in the fading light. The dream is gentle and strange and already fading, and you will not remember it when you wake. The night watchman has completed his rounds and is now sitting by the caravanserai gate, his lantern set on the ground beside him, his staff across his knees. He is not sleeping, but his eyes are half closed and his breathing is slow. He knows the village will wake soon, and he will be relieved of his duty, and he will walk home to his small house near the mosque, where his wife will have flatbread and tea waiting. The thought is pleasant, and he lets it sit in his mind without holding on to it too tightly. The camels behind him have fallen silent, their cud chewing done for the night, their long necks stretched out on the earth, their breathing deep and rhythmic. The first hint of grey appears in the eastern sky, a faint lightning that is more a suggestion than a colour. The stars do not disappear, but they seem to withdraw slightly, becoming paler and smaller. The mountain ridge, which was a black silhouette, now has a soft edge, a line of dark grey against a deep grey sky. The rooster feels the change more strongly now, and it ruffles its feathers again, a little more vigorously, preparing its voice for the first crow. The plane tree leaves, which were still and silent all night, begin to move as the breeze strengthens, their rustling a soft, dry sound that is the first real sound of the waking world. You do not wake yet. The grey light is too faint to penetrate the window, and the loom room remains dark. Your breathing is still slow and even, and your face is relaxed, the small lines around your eyes smoothed out by the depth of your rest. The blanket has slipped a little, exposing one shoulder to the cool air, but you are not cold enough to wake. The dream of the walking loom has faded, and you are back in the deep, peaceful emptiness where there is no world and no weaving. Only the slow pulse of your heart and the gentle rise and fall of your chest. The village rests in this in-between time, the long, quiet hour before the rooster crows and the doors open and the day begins. The water channel trickles on, as it has all night, and the mountains still hold the dark, though the dark is now a softer dark, a fading dark. Nothing happens. Nothing needs to happen. The night has been full and complete, a deep, restoring well of silence and stillness, and it will end gently, without hurry, giving way to the dawn as naturally as sleep gives way to waking. You lie on the cot, wrapped in wool and darkness, and the night holds you for a little while longer, as patient as the loom, as steady as the stars. The rooster crows, a long, wavering call that pulls you gently from the depths of sleep and into the grey light of dawn. You open your eyes to the familiar sight of the loom room ceiling, the mud brick and wooden beams emerging from the shadows as the first pale light seeps through the high window. The cotton cover on the loom glows faintly, a soft white shape in the dimness, and the baskets of wool sit where you left them, their colours still muted by the early hour. You lie still for a moment, letting the last threads of sleep dissolve, your body warm under the wool blanket, your mind moving slowly from the emptiness of the night to the quiet anticipation of the morning. You push back the blanket and sit up on the cot, placing your bare feet on the cool clay floor. The coolness against your soles is the first distinct sensation of the day, a small, refreshing shock that travels up through your ankles and settles in your waking awareness. You stretch your arms overhead, feeling the pull in your shoulders and the pleasant ache in your back from the previous day's weaving, and then you rise to your feet. The room is silent except for the distant sound of the water channel and the first tentative chirps of sparrows in the plane tree. The loom waits under its cover, and you give it a brief glance before walking to the courtyard door. The courtyard is bathed in the soft, colourless light of early morning, the sky a pale, even grey that has not yet decided whether it will be blue or hazy. The plane tree stands motionless, its leaves still and dark, and the water jar beside the basin gleams with a faint sheen of condensation. You walk to the basin and pour water over your hands, splashing your face, the coolness clearing the last cobwebs of sleep from your eyes. The water runs down your neck and soaks the collar of your tunic, a small bracing shock that you welcome. You dry your face with the cotton cloth, and as you do, you hear the first sounds of the caravanserai stirring, a camel groaning, a driver's low call, the clatter of a copper pot. The caravan is preparing to move west. You remember the caravan master saying he would stay 2 nights, and this is the second morning. The traders will be loading their panniers, rolling their carpets, and checking the girths on the camels. The thought prompts a small intention in your mind. You want to visit the caravanserai before they leave, to look at the colours the master mentioned, the indigo and madder and walnut husk brown. You have enough indigo for now, and the madder red is sufficient for the field. But the walnut brown is a colour you have not used in a long while, a deep warm shade that would frame the pattern beautifully. You run your fingers through your hair, smoothing it down, and you slip on your sandals, the leather straps cool against your feet. You walk through the courtyard gate and into the lane, the packed earth still cool and slightly damp from the night. The village is waking around you. A woman opens her door and shakes out a rug. A child runs past with a clay cup heading toward the well. A donkey brays from its stall by the blacksmith's forge. The smells of the morning are wood smoke and fresh bread, and the faint clean scent of the irrigation channel. You walk at an easy pace, your sandals making a soft scuffing sound on the earth, and you turn the corner toward the caravanserai gate. The caravanserai courtyard is a bustle of orderly activity. The camels are standing, their loads already half secured on their backs, and the drivers circle them with practice calm tightening ropes and adjusting the striped saddlecloths. The traders move among the packs, some carrying rolled bundles of goods, others sipping tea from small cups while they discuss the day's journey. The caravan master stands near the gate, his dusty blue robe unchanged, his stick in his hand, and he is speaking with the village headman for what will likely be the final time before the departure. The morning light catches the brass lanterns hanging from the pack frames, and they glint softly, small suns amidst the brown and grey of the camels' coats. You pause just inside the gate, taking in the scene, and then you walk toward the arcade where the traders have spread their goods for local exchange. A merchant you have not seen before, a younger man with a short beard and a green sash, is unrolling a bundle of wool as you approach. The wool is dyed with walnut husks, a deep, rich brown that warms the eye, its tone somewhere between dark earth and the color of aged wood. The merchant looks up as you stop, and he greets you with a small nod, his hands still smoothing the wool so that the full length of the skein lies flat on the carpet. You kneel beside the bundle and reach out to touch the wool, running your fingers along the fibers. The brown wool is as soft as the indigo, its texture slightly smoother, perhaps from the tannins in the walnut husks that acted as a mordant and a conditioner all at once. The color is even from end to end, a rich, lustrous shade that would make a fine border, and it has a faint, woodsy scent that reminds you of the hulls that fall from the walnut trees in the autumn. You ask the merchant how many skeins he has, and he pulls out 3 more, each one as carefully dyed as the first. You ask if he will trade for dried apricots and a small amount of silver, and he considers for a moment, then nods. The exchange is simple. You walk back to your house to fetch a small pouch of dried apricots from the storage jar in the kitchen alcove, the leather of the pouch soft and fragrant, and you add a few silver coins that you keep in a clay jar buried in the corner of the loom room. Coins you received for a rug sold last winter. When you return to the caravanserai, the merchant has already bundled the brown wool skeins with a strip of cotton cloth, and you hand him the pouch and the coins. He counts the coins with a quick, practiced touch, nods again, and hands you the bundle. The whole transaction takes only a few minutes, and it leaves no ripples behind. It is simply a pair of needs meeting in the quiet of the morning. You carry the brown wool home, its clean sheep smell mixing with the dust of the lane and the smoke of the courtyard ovens. The weight of the skeins is pleasing in your arms, dense and substantial, and you imagine how the color will look against the indigo border and the red field. When you reach your courtyard, you place the bundle on the bench near the plane tree, and you pause for a moment to look up at the sky. The grey has lightened to a pale milky blue, and the sun has just cleared the mountain ridge, its first direct rays touching the plane tree leaves and turning them a translucent green. The sparrows are fully awake now, chattering in the branches, and the cicada has not yet started its drone, leaving the morning air fresh and clear. You go into the loom room and lift the cotton cover from the loom, folding it and hanging it over its peg. The warp threads stand in their pale ranks, the indigo border and the red field and the 3 completed diamonds exactly as you left them, the half-finished 4th diamond waiting with its ivory outline 6 rows from closure. The colors look different in the morning light, cooler, sharper, the red a little less glowing, the indigo a little more blue. You run your palm over the woven section, feeling the familiar dense pile, and then you look at the brown wool on the bench outside. A small adjustment occurs to you. A quiet idea: you could unpick a few rows of the last diamond and frame it in the walnut-brown, creating a subtle shift that will please the eye without disrupting the pattern. The decision is calm, unhurried, and you settle onto the stool to carry it out. Unpicking the knots is as careful a process as tying them. You take up a small pointed tool from the shelf by the wall, a slender piece of iron with a curved tip that your father used for this very purpose, and you begin to lift the first knot of the row, working the tip under the wool and gently pulling it free from the warp. The knot loosens with a soft sigh, and you set the snipped end aside, a tiny curlicue of red wool that you will save for the dye pot later. You work your way across the row, removing the red knots one by one, then the ivory outline knots, then the red of the next row. The process takes time, and you do not hurry. The warp threads emerge clean and undamaged, their tension unchanged, and you soon have a small pile of unraveled wool on the clay floor at your feet, a mixture of red and ivory that looks like scattered flower petals. When you have removed enough rows to make room for the brown border, you set the iron tool aside and pick up the first skein of walnut-dyed wool. You separate a tuft from the skein, rolling it between your fingers, and the color seems even richer in the loom room light than it did in the caravanserai courtyard. It is a deep, warm brown with hints of gold where the light catches it, and it will set off the ivory diamonds beautifully, grounding them in a darker frame. You tie the first brown knot at the left edge, pulling it snug against the existing red field, and the knife cuts it close. The sound a soft, familiar snip. The brown begins to spread across the warp, and you adjust your rhythm slightly to accommodate the new texture, which is slightly slicker than the madder wool and requires a firmer pull. You work through the row, the brown wool replacing the red in a neat band that will become the new border of the diamond. When you reach the ivory outline, you use the natural cream wool as before, and the contrast between the three colors is immediately pleasing. The deep indigo beyond, the rich brown framing the diamond, the pale ivory line, and the red heart. The combination is harmonious and quiet, a small refinement that makes the pattern feel more complete, as if the brown had always been meant to be there. You tie the final knot of the row and run your palm over the new section, feeling the brown pile settle into place beside the older colors, and you nod slightly to yourself before beginning the next row. Outside, the caravan sounds are changing. The low murmur of voices and the groans of camels are giving way to a more purposeful rhythm. The creak of leather, the thud of loaded panniers being secured, the jingle of bells as the camels rise to their feet. You can hear the caravan master's voice rising above the others, not shouting, but speaking in a carrying tone, calling the order of the march. The caravan will leave soon, heading west toward the next village and the next caravanserai, and the village will return to its own quiet rhythm, the brief pulse of trade subsiding into the slower pace of daily work. You do not stop weaving to watch the departure, but you let yourself be aware of it as a background texture, the same way you are aware of the water channel and the sparrows. The brown wool continues to flow through your fingers, the diamonds continue to take shape, and the morning light continues its slow climb across the wall. When the first camel begins to move, its bell clanking in a slow, deliberate tempo, you glance up through the doorway and see the caravan filing out of the gate, the lead camel swaying under its striped load, the donkeys with their smaller packs, the traders walking alongside with their staffs and their water skins. The caravan master rides at the rear on his grey donkey, his blue robe a spot of colour against the dun landscape, his stick resting across his thighs. The procession moves along the western road, the dust rising in a pale cloud that hangs in the air before slowly settling. The bells grow fainter, their individual notes merging into a single receding chime that becomes thinner and thinner until it is swallowed by the distance and the rustle of the plane tree. You watch for a moment longer, your hands pausing on the warp, and then the last camel disappears around the bend in the road, and the village is quiet again, the dust settling, the caravanserai gate standing open to an empty courtyard. You return to your weaving, the brown knotting resuming with a steady, calm rhythm. The departure of the caravan leaves no emptiness behind, only a return to the familiar stillness, a stillness that feels deeper and more settled for having been briefly interrupted. The sparrows continue their chatter, the cicada begins its first tentative buzz of the day, and the blacksmith's hammer starts its slow tapping from the forge under the carob tree. The village has absorbed the caravan and released it, and now it breathes again in its own patient time. The brown border progresses, and you complete the first diamond framed in walnut. The effect is subtle but distinct, the brown lending a warmth to the ivory outline that the red alone did not provide. You sit back on the stool and examine the completed diamond, your hands resting on your thighs, and you feel a quiet, unhurried satisfaction that needs no expression. The rug is becoming what it was meant to be, and the new color has found its place as naturally as if it had always been part of the plan. You take a sip of water from the clay bowl by the door, the water still cool from the night, and you resume weaving. The morning passes in the steady accumulation of knots. You work through the morning's width of brown border, then another, and the diamonds march across the warp in their neat, geometric rows. The brown wool is a pleasure to handle, its slightly different texture keeping your fingers alert without breaking the rhythm, and the color seems to shift subtly as the light changes from the clear white of early morning to the warmer gold of mid-morning. The loom room is filled with the familiar sounds of the shuttle and the comb and the soft snip of the knife, and the world outside the doorway is a quiet, sunlit backdrop that you inhabit without needing to enter. The caravanserai is empty now, its courtyard swept clean by the watchman, its troughs refilled, its arcade silent. The only sign that the caravan was ever there is a faint, lingering smell of camel and spice, and a few stray pieces of straw that the breeze pushes into corners. The gate stands open, as it always does, waiting for the next caravan and the next and the next. The endless stream of travelers and goods that has been passing through this valley for as long as anyone can remember. You do not think about the next caravan. You think about the brown wool in your basket, and the diamond taking shape under your fingers, and the quiet, steady pulse of the weaving that fills the morning and the room and your own breathing. The morning after the caravan's departure dawns clear and still, the sky a pale, washed blue that promises a day of steady warmth. You wake without the rooster's call, your internal clock having already adjusted to the rhythm of the valley, and you lie for a moment on the cot, listening to the water channel and the first tentative chirps of the sparrows. The loom room is cool, the air fresh with the scent of clay and wool, and the covered loom stands against the wall like a silent promise. You rise, wash your face in the courtyard basin, and eat a small piece of flat bread with a cup of tea. The tea bitter and hot, and then you take your place on the stool. The brown wool waits in its basket, the deep walnut color rich and warm in the morning light, and the half-finished diamond on the warp waits for your hands to complete it. You pick up the first tuft of brown, roll it between your fingers, and begin the row where you left off the evening before, the knot forming with a familiar, easy pull. The knife trims the wool, the thumb presses, and the rhythm of the weaving settles over you like a familiar garment, comfortable and worn. The caravan is gone, the village is quiet, and the day stretches ahead, full of the slow, patient work of the loom. You work through the morning with a steady, unhurried pace, the brown border growing row by row as the sun climbs higher, and the light shifts from pale gold to a brighter, whiter tone. The diamonds are nearing completion now. The fourth one has its ivory outline closed, and you move on to the fifth, counting the warp hairs with the soft tapping of your thumb. The brown wool handles differently with each passing hour as the temperature warms it slightly, the fibers relaxing and becoming even more pliant. The red field continues to fill in around the diamonds, and the indigo border above it all remains a deep, dark sea that anchors the pattern. The rug is more than half finished, though you do not measure it in fractions. You measure it in the feel of the pile under your palm, in the number of diamonds completed, in the subtle satisfaction of watching the design emerge from the blank warp. As midday approaches, you pause to stretch your legs and fetch a bowl of water from the courtyard, drinking it slowly while standing in the doorway. The plane tree rustles in a light breeze, and the pomegranate bush across the way is dotted with small, hard fruits that have begun to redden. The caravanserai gate stands open and empty, its courtyard swept clean, the troughs full and still. The village is hushed, the blacksmith's hammer silent during the noon rest, the dogs dozing in the shade. You return to the stool, your body refreshed, and you pick up the shuttle, sending it through the shed with a smooth, familiar motion. The afternoon begins. The light mellows as the hours pass, the shadows of the walk threads sliding across the clay floor and up the opposite wall. You lose yourself in the knotting, the brown wool blending with the red in the ivory in a seamless rhythm, each row a small, complete world. The comb beats its 3 soft taps, the shuttle whispers, the knife snips. The sounds become a kind of silence themselves, a quiet music that fills the room and your mind. You think of nothing but the next knot and the next and the next, and the afternoon drifts by like a slow cloud, without edges or urgency. By late afternoon you've completed a full hand's width of new rug since the caravan left. You know this not by any mark on the warp, but by the span of your thumb and little finger, which you stretch out and place against the woven surface. The distance from the last row of the old section to the current row is exactly the width of your hand, a measurement as old as the craft itself. You nod slightly, a small private acknowledgement, and then you return to the knotting. But the awareness of the progress settles into you with a quiet warmth. The rug is growing, day by day, hand's width by hand's width. The sun begins its slow descent toward the mountain ridge, and the light through the window takes on the amber hue that signals the approach of evening. The indigo border darkens to a bruised purple, the madder red glows like dying embers, and the walnut brown deepens until it is almost the color of rich earth. The ivory diamonds catch the last of the light. their pale outlines seeming to float above the dark field. You work one more row, then another, and then you feel the day's energy beginning to ebb, replaced by the peaceful tiredness that comes from a full and steady labor. You set the comb on the loom beam, its iron teeth dark against the pale wood, and you rise from the stool, your body moving slowly, your muscles carrying the memory of the hours. You stretch your arms overhead, feeling the pull along your spine, and then you take the cotton cover from its peg and drape it over the warp, tucking the corners around the side beams with gentle, practiced motions. The loom becomes a quiet shape in the dimming room, the colors hidden, the pattern suspended, the shuttle and knife resting beside the comb on the beam. You stand for a moment, your hand resting on the cover, and you feel the faint warmth of the wool beneath the cloth, a small, living heat. You step outside into the courtyard, just as the sun touches the mountain ridge, the sky above it, a soft gradient of apricot and lavender and pale gold. The plane tree rustles in the evening breeze, its leaves turning their silvery undersides to the fading light, and a blackbird somewhere in its branches sings a few liquid notes before falling silent. The water channel continues its patient murmur along the garden wall, a sound so constant and familiar that it has become a part of your own breathing. A child laughs somewhere in the lane, a bright, brief sound that rises and falls and leaves a small, warm echo in the quiet air. You walk to the stone step by the courtyard wall and sit down, the stone still warm from the afternoon sun, and you stretch your legs out in front of you, crossing your ankles. Your hands rest in your lap, the fingers slightly curled, the calluses pale against your skin. The village settles into its evening rhythm. The smell of baking bread drifts from a neighbor's oven. The muezzin's chant begins its slow, familiar rise from the mosque. The first bats flit between the plane tree and the wall. The caravanserai is silent and empty, its gates still open, its courtyard a quiet, shadowed square waiting for the next travelers who will come in their own time. You think about the rug waiting under its cover, the hand's width of new weaving, the way the brown wool frames the ivory diamonds, the red field that will continue to grow tomorrow. You think of the next row you will tie in the morning, the way the wool will feel cool and smooth in the first light, the way the shuttle will hum through the shed, the way the comb will beat its 3 soft taps against the weft. The thought is not a plan or a goal. It is a gentle anticipation, a quiet looking forward that has no urgency, no impatience. It settles into you as peacefully as sleep settling over the valley, as naturally as the evening star appearing above the ridge. The first stars are out now, faint and small in the deepening blue, and the crescent moon has risen over the eastern peaks, its thin silver curve adding a soft light to the courtyard. The plane tree stands dark and still, the water channel murmurs on, and the child's laugh has faded into the general hush of the night. You sit for a while longer, letting the day's accumulation of small movements settle into your muscles, letting the peace of the village wrap around you. The rug grows, row by slow row, and the loom waits, its walnut frame sturdy and patient, its warp threads taut, its colors hidden under the cotton cover. All is well. The valley rests, the loom rests, and you rest, ready for the next thread and the next day, and the quiet, steady work that will continue as long as the wool holds out and the sun rises over the mountains. The night deepens, and you rise from the step, walk inside, and lie down on the cot, the scent of wool and clay and walnut husks mingling in the darkness, and you close your eyes, your breathing slowing, your mind drifting into a soft, dreamless sleep.